You're still awake, aren't you? I can tell. That kind of tired where your eyes burn, but your mind is doing its own thing. So let's make this part easier. Settle back and let the rain take over the quiet while I read you 5 slow stories. Nothing demanding, nothing you have to hold on to, just something gentle to help you drift. Story 1. The person who tried to talk through my wall. It started as a whisper, so faint that the first few times I heard it, I thought it was just the pipes settling or the wind finding its way through some crack in the old building's facade. A soft murmur that seemed to come from the wall behind my bed, rising and falling in a rhythm that was almost like speech. I'd lie there in the dark, straining to hear, and just when I'd convinced myself it was nothing, it would come again. That quiet, insistent sound, like someone talking in their sleep on the other side of the plaster. I'd moved into the apartment about 6 weeks earlier, after my lease ran out on the place I'd been renting across town. It was a step up in some ways. Bigger kitchen, actual closet space, a clawfoot tub that made me feel like I was living in a different century, and a step down in others. The building was old, one of those 6-story brick structures from the 1940s that had been converted to apartments sometime in the 70s and hadn't been updated much since. The radiators clanked and hissed. The elevator took so long I usually just walked the 4 flights to my unit. The walls were thick enough to muffle most sounds, but thin enough that I could sometimes hear my neighbors if they were being particularly loud. I worked from home as a freelance copy editor, which meant I spent most of my time alone in that apartment, surrounded by manuscripts and style guides and the particular silence of a space that belongs only to you. It was the kind of quiet I'd always craved, peaceful, productive, the absence of office chatter and commuter noise. But after a few weeks in that building, I started to notice that the quiet had a texture to it, a weight, like the air itself was holding something back. The first time I really heard the voice was a Thursday night in late November. The rain had been coming down for hours, that steady autumn deluge that makes the city feel like it's dissolving, and I'd gone to bed early with a book I couldn't focus on. The radiator was doing its usual percussion routine, clanking and gurgling as steam moved through the ancient pipes, and outside, the wind was pushing against the windows hard enough to make the glass creak. I should have been drowsy, should have been halfway to sleep. Instead, I was lying there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to a sound that didn't belong. Someone was talking on the other side of my bedroom wall. I sat up slowly, the book sliding off my chest onto the comforter. The voice was clearer now that I was paying attention, though I still couldn't make out words. It was low, almost guttural, with a cadence that rose and fell like someone asking questions and then answering them. A conversation, maybe, except I only heard one voice. No pauses where someone else might be responding. Just that single tone, going on and on, muffled by the wall but unmistakably present. My bedroom shared a wall with the apartment next door. Unit 4D, I thought, though I'd never seen anyone coming or going from it in the weeks since I'd moved in. The mailboxes in the lobby had a name on the 4D slot, something starting with K. I couldn't remember exactly, but I'd never heard any sounds from that unit before. No footsteps, no television, no doors opening and closing. It had seemed empty, abandoned maybe, one of those apartments that sits vacant between tenants while the landlord figures out what to do with it. But someone was clearly in there now. Someone was in there talking. I got out of bed and pressed my ear against the wall, feeling the cold plaster against my cheek. The voice was still going, and this close, I could almost make out words. They were distorted, warped by the wall between us, but they had the shape of language, the rhythm of sentences. Whoever was speaking, they were speaking to someone, or about something, with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Then the voice stopped. The silence that followed was so sudden and complete that it felt like a physical presence, like the absence of sound had its own weight. I stood there with my ear against the wall, waiting, listening, barely breathing. 1 minute passed. 2. The radiator clanked. pushed against the window, but the voice didn't come back. I went back to bed eventually, though I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up throughout the night, certain I'd heard something, straining to catch that murmur again, but the wall stayed silent. By morning, I'd half convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that it had been a dream or a hypnagogic hallucination or just the strange acoustics of an old building playing tricks on my ears. The next day, I knocked on the door of 4D. No one answered. I knocked again, waited, pressed my ear to the door the way I'd pressed it against the wall the night before. Nothing. No footsteps, no shuffling, no indication that anyone was home. I tried the doorknob, gently, just to see. It was locked, of course, but the handle felt cold and unused, like no one had touched it in a long time. I asked the building super about it when I ran into him in the lobby that afternoon. He was an older man named Gus, who always seemed vaguely annoyed by everything, the kind of person who answered questions with as few words as possible. 4D? He frowned like I'd asked him something obscene. That unit's empty. Been empty for almost a year. A year? I thought I heard someone in there last night, talking. Gus shrugged, already turning away. Building's old, sound carries weird. Probably heard someone from another floor. He paused at the door to the basement, looked back at me with something that might have been suspicion. Why? Something wrong? No, I said, just curious. But I wasn't just curious. I was certain. I'd heard someone talking through that wall, clear as anything, a voice that had gone on for minutes before cutting off like a switch being flipped. Sound might carry weird in old buildings, but not like that. Not with that clarity, that specificity. Whatever I'd heard, it had come from 4D, and according to the super, no one had lived there in almost a year. That night, I lay in bed with the lights on, watching the wall, waiting. The rain had stopped, but the wind was still up, rattling the windows, making the building groan around me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, told myself that Gus was right, that old buildings played tricks, that I'd probably heard someone on a different floor, or even from outside, some passing conversation amplified by a quirk of architecture. Then, around midnight, the whisper started again. Faint at first, just like before, a murmur that rose out of the silence like something surfacing from deep water. I sat up, my heart beating faster, and listened as the voice grew clearer. The same low tone, the same insistent rhythm, the same feeling of someone talking and talking without pause, without response, without any apparent need to breathe. But this time, I could make out one word, just one, repeated over and over, woven through the stream of sounds I couldn't understand. My name. Whoever was behind that wall, they were saying my name. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat up in bed with my back against the headboard and my knees pulled to my chest, listening to that voice whisper my name through the wall until my ears rang from the strain of focusing on it. The sound would fade sometimes, dip below the threshold of hearing, and I'd think it had finally stopped. Then it would rise again, that same low murmur, and I'd catch it again. My name, wrapped in syllables I couldn't understand, repeated like a prayer or an incantation. By the time the first gray light of morning started seeping through my curtains, I was shaking, not from cold, though my apartment was freezing. The radiator had gone silent hours ago, leaving the room to sink into a chill that felt unnatural for late November. I was shaking because I was terrified, because everything I knew about the world said this shouldn't be happening. And yet it was. Someone was in that empty apartment next door. Someone who knew my name. Someone who'd been talking through the wall for hours without stopping. I called in sick to my freelance clients that day, sent vague emails about a family emergency, and spent the morning doing research. The building had been constructed in 1947, originally as a residential hotel for single working women. It had been converted to standard apartments in 1978, and since then had passed through 3 different management companies, each one leaving behind its own layer of neglected maintenance and incomplete records. The current owners were a faceless LLC based out of Delaware, the kind of shell company that exists only on paper and responds to nothing. Finding information about 4D specifically was harder. I couldn't access tenant records without going through the management company, and when I called them, the woman who answered was polite but unhelpful. Privacy concerns, she said. She couldn't discuss other tenants or former tenants. Was there something wrong with my unit? Had there been a noise complaint? I hung up without explaining. What was I supposed to tell her? That the empty apartment next door was whispering my name in the middle of the night. That afternoon, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I waited until I was sure Gus had gone home for the day, and then I went down to the basement where the super kept his office. The door was locked, but the lock was old and cheap, the kind you could pop with a credit card if you knew what you were doing. I'd learned the trick in college from a roommate who was always losing her keys. I told myself I was just looking for answers, just trying to understand what was happening in the apartment next to mine. Gus's office was a cluttered mess of work orders and maintenance logs and keys hanging on a pegboard that covered one entire wall. I found the master key ring after a few minutes of searching, and I found the records I was looking for in a filing cabinet that hadn't been organized since the Clinton administration. Tenant history, unit by unit, going back to 1995. The file for 4D was thin. Only 3 tenants in almost 30 years, which seemed strange for an apartment in a building like this. The first had stayed for 12 years, a woman named Helen Marsh who'd moved out in 2007. The second was a man named David Keller, who'd lived there from 2008 to 2016. And the third was a woman named Miriam Voss, who'd moved in January of 2022, and the file ended there. No move-out date, no forwarding address, just a lease agreement signed in January 2022, and then nothing, like she'd simply stopped existing. I flipped through the rest of the pages, looking for anything else. A note from Gus, an incident report, something to explain why the file just ended. At the very back, I found a newspaper clipping that had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn through in places. The headline made my stomach drop. Woman missing from East Side apartment. The article was dated March 2023, just over a year ago. Miriam Voss, 34, had been reported missing by her sister after failing to show up for work for 3 consecutive days. Police had found her apartment locked from the inside, her belongings undisturbed, no signs of forced entry or struggle. She'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind her phone, her wallet, her keys. The case remained open, but no leads had emerged. I read the article 3 times, my hands trembling so badly the paper shook. Miriam Voss had lived in 4D. Miriam Voss had disappeared from 4D. And now, almost a year later, someone was whispering through the wall of that apartment, saying my name in a voice that never stopped for breath. I put everything back where I'd found it, locked Gus's office behind me, and went upstairs to my apartment. The hallway was quiet, the building settling into that late afternoon stillness that always preceded the evening. I stopped outside 4D and pressed my ear to the door, listening for any sound from within. Nothing, just silence, thick and heavy, like the apartment was holding its breath. But when I got back to my own unit and walked into my bedroom, something was different. Something was wrong. It took me a moment to figure out what it was, my eyes scanning the familiar space, searching for the thing that had triggered the alarm bells in my brain. Then I saw it. On the wall behind my bed, just above the headboard, someone had written in what looked like gray dust or ash, the letters smeared but still legible, "Can you hear me?" I backed out of the room so fast I tripped over my own feet and went sprawling into the hallway. My heart was hammering, my breath coming in short gasps, and all I could think was that someone had been in my apartment. Someone had come in while I was downstairs, had walked into my bedroom, had written a message on my wall, and left without a trace. Or something had. Something that didn't need doors. The whisper started again that night, hours earlier than before. It started while I was still awake, still sitting in my living room with every light blazing, trying to convince myself that I should just leave. Just pack a bag and go to a hotel and figure out the rest tomorrow. but I didn't leave. I couldn't. Because underneath my fear, underneath the rational voice screaming at me to run, there was something else. A feeling that Miriam Voss had been trying to reach someone for over a year. That she'd been trapped behind that wall, invisible and unheard, and I was the first person who'd actually listened. The whisper grew louder as midnight approached, and this time, when I pressed my ear to the wall, I could make out more than just my name. "Help me," the voice said. "Please, help me, before he comes back." I pressed my palm flat against the wall, like I could somehow reach through it. The plaster was cold beneath my hand, colder than it should have been, and I could feel something thrumming beneath the surface, not vibration exactly, but presence, energy, the sense of someone on the other side reaching back. "Miriam," I said. My voice came out barely above a whisper, cracked and thin. "Is that you? Is that your name? Miriam Voss?" The whisper changed, became more urgent, more desperate, words tumbling over each other in a rush I could barely follow. But I heard the answer. "Yes, yes, Miriam, please, he's coming. He comes at night. Please help me, please, please, please." "Who?" I pressed harder against the wall, as if I could push through by sheer force of will. "Who comes at night? Who did this to you?" The whisper stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, and in that silence I felt something shift. The temperature in the room dropped so fast my breath came out in a visible cloud, and the cold wasn't just cold anymore. It was wrong, malevolent, like something had noticed me noticing it, and now it was paying attention. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, slow and deliberate, stopping right at my door. I held my breath. The footsteps didn't move, didn't retreat, just stood there, waiting, and I could feel whoever it was on the other side of that door the same way I could feel Miriam on the other side of the wall. A presence, a weight, something that knew I was there and wanted me to know it too. The doorknob rattled. Just once, just a quick test, and then the footsteps moved on. I listened to them fade down the hallway, heard the creak of another door opening and closing. 4D, I was sure of it, the empty apartment that wasn't empty at all. And then nothing. Silence again, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I didn't sleep, didn't even try. I sat on my couch with every light on and my phone in my hand, ready to call 911 if those footsteps came back. They didn't, but just before dawn, when the first gray light was starting to seep through my curtains, I heard Miriam's voice again, fainter now, exhausted, like she'd used up everything she had trying to warn me. "David," she whispered. "His name is David. He never left. David Keller, the tenant who'd lived in 4D from 2008 to 2016. I remembered the name from the file I'd found in Gus's office, remembered thinking it was strange that the apartment had only had 3 tenants in 30 years. But according to those records, David had moved out years before Miriam moved in. He shouldn't have had any connection to her, shouldn't have been anywhere near that apartment when she disappeared. Unless the records were wrong, unless David had never really left. I spent the next day digging into David Keller's history, using every research skill I'd developed over years of fact-checking manuscripts and verifying sources. What I found made my blood run cold. David Keller had worked as a maintenance technician for the building from 2003 to 2016, which explained his long tenure in 4D. Employees often got discounted rent in exchange for being on call for repairs. He'd been quiet, according to the few mentions I found in old tenant complaints. Kept to himself, always seemed to be around, watching, but never actually did anything wrong. Then, in 2016, he'd been fired. The reasons weren't specified in any public record, but I found a police report from that same year. A woman in the building had accused him of stalking her, of letting himself into her apartment when she wasn't home, of leaving notes and small objects that let her know he'd been there. The charges had been dropped when the woman moved away and refused to testify. David had disappeared after that, and everyone assumed he'd moved on. But what if he hadn't? What if he'd found a way to stay in the building, hidden in the walls or the basement or some forgotten space that no one knew about? What if he'd been watching tenants come and go for years, waiting for the right one, and Miriam Voss had been unlucky enough to catch his attention? I thought about her apartment, locked from the inside, her belongings undisturbed. No signs of forced entry because he didn't need to force his way in. He knew this building better than anyone, knew every access point and hidden passage, knew how to come and go without being seen. He'd taken Miriam, and somehow, impossibly, she was still here, still trapped, still trying to reach someone who could help her. That night, I didn't wait for the whisper. I pressed my ear to the wall as soon as darkness fell, listening, straining to hear anything from the other side. For a long time, there was nothing. Just the creak of the building settling, the distant sound of traffic, the radiator clanking through its endless cycle. I was starting to think she was gone, that whatever energy she'd used to reach me had been exhausted when I heard it. Not a whisper this time. A knock. 3 slow raps against the wall, right where my ear was pressed. I jerked back instinctively, my heart lurching, and then forced myself to lean in again. Reached up with my hand and knocked back, 3 times, the same rhythm. A pause, then another knock, this one more urgent. "I'm here," I said, pressing my palm flat against the plaster. "I'm listening. Tell me how to help you." The temperature dropped again, that same malevolent cold seeping through the wall like something on the other side was pressing against it. But this time, Miriam's voice came with it, clearer than I'd ever heard her before. "The basement," she said. "Behind the boiler. That's where he keeps me. That's where—" She stopped. I heard something else then, something that made every hair on my body stand up. Footsteps. Not in the hallway this time. Inside the wall, moving toward me with a slow, deliberate rhythm that sounded nothing like the building settling. "He knows," Miriam whispered. "He knows you can hear me. Run. Run now." The wall beside my bed bulged outward, just slightly, just for a second, like something on the other side was pressing against it, testing its strength. I saw the plaster crack, saw dust sift down onto my pillow, and then I was moving, grabbing my phone, my keys, sprinting for the door without looking back. I made it to the hallway before I heard the crash behind me. Something breaking through, something coming after me. I didn't stop to see what it was. I just ran. The stairwell was dark. The lights that should have been illuminating each landing were out, every single one, leaving me to navigate by the faint glow of the exit signs and the pale light from my phone screen. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my hand sliding along the railing, my breath coming in ragged gasps that echoed off the concrete walls. Behind me, somewhere above, I heard a door slam open, heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, starting down the stairs after me. I burst out of the stairwell into the lobby, my momentum carrying me halfway to the front door before I realized I wasn't going to make it. The footsteps were too close, moving too fast, and even if I got outside, where was I going to go? It was 2 a.m, the streets were empty, and whatever was chasing me knew this building better than I ever could. He'd find me. He'd catch me, just like he'd caught Miriam. Instead of going for the front door, I veered left, toward the basement stairs. I don't know why I did it. Some instinct, some desperate hope that if I could find what he'd been hiding, I'd have leverage, evidence, something I could use to stop him. Or maybe it was Miriam's voice, still echoing in my head, telling me where he kept her, behind the boiler. That's where he keeps me. She'd wanted me to find her. Maybe that was the only way any of this ended. The basement door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. Gus had mentioned once that the lock was broken and the management company wouldn't pay to fix it. I pulled it open and plunged into the darkness below, the stairs creaking under my feet, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The smell hit me halfway down, mold and rust and something else, something organic and wrong that made my stomach lurch. I pressed my sleeve over my nose and kept going, The basement was a maze of storage cages and utility rooms, pipes snaking overhead, the boiler humming in its alcove at the far end. My phone's flashlight cut a weak path through the darkness, illuminating rusted shelves and forgotten furniture and shadows that seemed to move just at the edge of my vision. I could hear him behind me now, his footsteps on the basement stairs, slower than before, deliberate. He wasn't chasing anymore. He was hunting. I found the boiler room at the end of a narrow corridor, the door hanging slightly open. The humming was louder here, a constant vibration that I could feel in my teeth, and the heat radiating from the massive metal tank made the air shimmer. I squeezed past the door and swept my light across the space, looking for whatever Miriam had wanted me to find. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the boiler, the pipes, the controls that Gus probably checked once a month. But then my light caught something at the back of the room, half hidden behind a stack of old maintenance supplies, a seam in the wall that didn't quite match, a gap where there shouldn't have been one. I pushed aside the supplies and found a door. Not a regular door, a hatch really, set low in the wall like the entrance to a crawl space. The metal was rusted, but the hinges were clean, oiled recently, and the padlock that should have secured it was hanging open like someone had just passed through. The smell was coming from behind that door. That organic wrongness, that decay. I knew what I was going to find before I opened it. Knew and opened it anyway, because I had to see. Had to know for certain. The crawl space beyond was maybe 4 feet high, extending back into darkness that my phone couldn't fully penetrate. But I could see enough. I could see the mattress on the ground, stained and torn. The chains bolted to the wall, the cuffs still attached. The scratches in the concrete where someone had tried to claw their way out. And at the very back, slumped against the far wall like a discarded doll, a shape that had once been a woman. Miriam Voss. What was left of her? I think I screamed. I don't remember exactly. The next few seconds are a blur of sound and motion and pure animal terror. I know I turned to run. Know I made it maybe 3 steps before something slammed into me from behind, driving me to the ground with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. My phone skittered away across the concrete floor, the flashlight spinning, casting wild shadows across the walls. A hand closed around my throat. Not tight enough to choke, but tight enough to hold me in place, to pin me down, while a face leaned into my field of vision. A man's face, pale and gaunt, with eyes that reflected my phone's light like a cat's eyes in the dark. He was smiling. A small, patient smile, like he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "You shouldn't have listened," David Keller said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, completely at odds with the pressure of his hand on my windpipe. She tried so hard to reach someone, all those years, whispering through the walls, but no one ever heard her. No one except you. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. My hands were scrabbling at his arm, trying to pry his fingers loose, but he was stronger than he looked, stronger than anyone should be after hiding in the walls of a building for years. "I watched you," he continued, "from the beginning. Saw you move in, saw you unpack your boxes, saw you lying in bed at night thinking you were alone. You were never alone. I was always right there, just on the other side of the wall, listening, waiting." His grip tightened. The edges of my vision started to blur. "She was like you know. Miriam. She heard things too, asked questions, got too curious." He leaned closer, close enough that I could smell him, sweat and mildew and something rotten underneath. I had to keep her quiet, had to make sure she couldn't tell anyone what she knew, but she wouldn't stop trying. Even after she died, she wouldn't stop. And now you found her, and I'm going to have to keep you quiet too. My hand found something on the floor, a piece of pipe, rusted and heavy, that must have fallen from somewhere overhead. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I swung it as hard as I could, felt it connect with the side of his head, heard the crack of impact and his grunt of surprise. His grip loosened, just for a second, and that was all I needed. I shoved him off and ran, back through the boiler room, back down the corridor, back up the basement stairs. I could hear him behind me, cursing, stumbling, but I had a head start, and I wasn't going to waste it. I burst into the lobby, slammed through the front door, and kept running until I reached the police station 4 blocks away. By the time the officers followed me back to the building, David was gone. Disappeared into whatever hidden passages he'd been using for years, vanished into the walls like he'd never existed. But the crawl space was still there. Miriam was still there, and the evidence they found, the chains, the scratches, the DNA that would later match 3 other missing women from the area, was enough to launch the largest manhunt the city had seen in decades. They found the passages 3 days later. A network of crawl spaces and maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the walls of the building, connecting units through gaps in the original construction that David had widened over years of patient work. Some of them were barely large enough to squeeze through. Others opened into spaces big enough to stand in, hollowed out behind closets and bathrooms, equipped with peepholes that looked into almost every apartment. He'd been watching all of us. For years, he'd been living in the spaces between our lives, moving through the building like a ghost, choosing his victims with the careful deliberation of a predator who had all the time in the world. The police found supplies cached throughout the tunnel system: canned food, bottled water, blankets, tools. Everything he needed to survive indefinitely without ever showing his face in public. They found photographs too, hundreds of them, of women who'd lived in the building over the past 8 years. Some of them were still residents. Some had moved away, never knowing how close they'd come to becoming another body behind the boiler. And some, 4 of them, including Miriam, had simply disappeared, their cases going cold, their families left to wonder forever what had happened. They caught David 2 weeks after I escaped. He'd made it out of the building that night through a passage that led to the basement of the building next door, and he'd been hiding in a storage facility on the other side of the city, probably planning to wait until the attention died down before finding a new building to infest. A security guard noticed him acting strangely, called it in, and within hours he was in custody. The trial lasted 4 months, and I testified on 3 separate occasions, describing the whispers, the messages, the night he'd tried to kill me in the basement. He never showed any emotion during my testimony, just sat there with that same patient smile, watching me with eyes that made my skin crawl, even across the courtroom. He got 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge called him the most dangerous predator she'd ever encountered, someone who'd turned an entire building into his hunting ground and operated undetected for nearly a decade. When they led him away, he looked back at me one last time, and I could have sworn he mouthed something. 2 words that I couldn't quite make out, but that I've replayed in my mind 1,000 times since. I think he said, "I'll wait." I moved out of the building the week after David's arrest. Couldn't stay there, not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned about the walls I'd been sleeping beside for months. The management company offered me a settlement to keep quiet about the security failures that had allowed David to operate for so long, and I took it. Not because I wanted their money, but because I wanted to be done. I wanted to walk away and never think about that building again. But I still think about Miriam. In the weeks after I found her body, while the police were still processing the crime scene and the building was still swarming with investigators, I'd sometimes lie awake at night listening for her voice. Part of me expected to hear it again, that whisper coming through whatever wall I happened to be sleeping beside, still calling my name, still asking for help. But the whispers had stopped. From the moment I found her in that crawl space, the moment her story finally became known, Miriam Voss went silent. I like to think she found peace. That whatever had kept her tethered to that building, whatever desperate energy had allowed her to reach through walls and write messages in dust and make herself heard after death, it was released when the truth came out. She'd spent over a year trying to tell someone what had happened to her, and I'd finally listened. I'd found her. I'd made sure the world knew her name and her story and the monster who'd taken her life. The families of the other victims reached out to me after the trial. 3 other women. 3 other lives cut short, 3 other families who'd spent years not knowing. They thanked me for finding the truth, for giving them closure, for making sure David Keller would never hurt anyone again. I didn't know what to say to them. I hadn't done it for recognition or gratitude. I'd done it because a dead woman had whispered through my wall and I couldn't ignore her. I still live alone, still work from home, still spend my days editing manuscripts in the particular quiet of a space that belongs only to me. But the quiet feels different now. Lighter, less like something holding its breath, and more like actual silence, the ordinary absence of sound that most people take for granted. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear something that makes me pause, a creak in the walls, a murmur that sounds almost like speech. My heart will start pounding, and I'll press my ear against the plaster, listening for words that aren't there. It's always nothing. Just pipes settling, wind finding its way through cracks. The normal sounds of an old building doing what old buildings do. But I listen anyway. I'll always listen. Because I learned something in that apartment on the 4th floor. Something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The walls around us aren't as solid as we think. There are spaces in between, gaps where things can hide, where people can disappear, where the truth can get buried so deep that no one ever finds it. Most of the time, those spaces stay empty. Most of the time, there's nothing there but dust and darkness and the bones of buildings that have stood for longer than we've been alive. But sometimes, if you're quiet enough, if you listen hard enough, you can hear something calling out from those hidden places. A voice that's been waiting for someone to notice. A story that refuses to stay buried. And if you ever hear that voice, if you ever catch a whisper that sounds like words, a murmur that sounds like your name, don't ignore it. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Don't turn away and go back to sleep. Listen, because someone might be trying to tell you something, and you might be the only one who can hear. Story 2. My app notification from someone I blocked years ago. The notification came through at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, lighting up my phone on the nightstand with a soft chime that pulled me out of a dreamless sleep. I reached for it without thinking, the way we all do now, and squinted at the screen through bleary eyes. A message request on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture was blank, the username a random string of letters and numbers, and the preview showed only the first few words of the message. I found you again. Did you think you could... I almost dismissed it, almost swiped it away as spam or a bot or one of those scam accounts that slip through the filters. But something about those words made me pause, made my sleep-fogged brain sharpen into sudden alertness. I found you again. Not I found you, like a stranger making first contact. Again. Like we had history. Like this wasn't the first time. I opened the message request and read the full text, and the room seemed to tilt around me. I found you again. Did you think you could hide from me forever? I've been watching you, Marcus. New apartment, new job, new girlfriend. She's pretty. Does she know about us? Does she know what you did to me? The name at the end of the message was one I hadn't seen in almost 5 years. One I'd blocked on every platform, deleted from my contacts, tried to scrub from my memory entirely. Vanessa Oates, the woman who'd made my life a living nightmare during my last 2 years of college and the year after graduation. The woman I'd gotten a restraining order against. The woman who, according to the last update I'd received from the police, had been institutionalized in a psychiatric facility 3 states away. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, my heart hammering against my ribs. Beside me, my girlfriend Amy stirred slightly, but didn't wake. The rain that had been falling all evening was still pattering against the windows, a sound I usually found soothing, but now seemed to underscore the silence of the apartment, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I hadn't thought about Vanessa in years. Had worked hard not to think about her, actually, burying those memories under layers of therapy and medication, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life she'd nearly destroyed. We'd never even dated. That was the thing people always found hardest to understand. She'd been a classmate in my junior year marketing seminar, someone I'd partnered with on a group project, someone I'd been friendly with, the way you're friendly with dozens of people in college. I'd never led her on, never given her any indication that I was interested in anything more than friendship. But Vanessa had decided we were meant to be together, had decided that my politeness was secret love, that my attempts to distance myself were just playing hard to get, that we were soulmates destined to be together despite my apparent confusion about my own feelings. When I'd finally told her directly that I wasn't interested, that I was seeing someone else, that I needed her to stop contacting me, something in her had broken. Or maybe it had been broken all along, and I'd just finally seen it. The harassment started slowly. Messages that got progressively more intense, more desperate, more threatening. She'd show up at my apartment, my classes, my job at the campus bookstore. She'd follow my then-girlfriend home and leave notes on her car. She'd create new accounts every time I blocked her, find new ways to reach me no matter how many barriers I put up. By the time I graduated, I was jumping at shadows, checking over my shoulder constantly, unable to sleep without triple-checking the locks on my doors. The restraining order had helped, for a while. Then she'd violated it, twice, and the judge had ordered a psychiatric evaluation that revealed what everyone who dealt with her already suspected. Vanessa Oates was severely mentally ill, suffering from a delusional disorder that had fixated on me as its central obsession. She'd been committed to a facility in Ohio, and I'd moved across the country to start over in a city where no one knew my name or my history. That had been 4.5 years ago. 4.5 years of slowly learning to trust people again, to open up, to believe that I could have a normal life. I'd met Amy 2 years ago, had told her everything about my past, had let her in despite every instinct screaming at me to keep my walls up. We'd just moved in together 3 months ago. I'd finally started to believe that Vanessa was part of my past, a nightmare I'd woken up from, a chapter that was definitively closed. And now this. A message at 3:47 a.m., slipping through blocks that should have been impenetrable, telling me she'd found me again. I looked at the profile more closely. The account had been created that same day. Instagram showed the join date when you clicked through to a profile. No posts, no followers, no following. Just that blank avatar and that string of random characters and that single message waiting in my requests. She'd made this account specifically to contact me, specifically to let me know she was watching. New apartment, new job, new girlfriend. She knew. She knew everything about my current life, which meant she'd been researching me, tracking me, building a picture of my world from whatever digital breadcrumbs I'd left behind. Or, and this thought made my stomach drop, she was closer than that. Close enough to see my apartment, close enough to know about Amy. I blocked the account, reported it, took screenshots of everything before I did, the way I'd learned to do during those terrible years, building documentation for the inevitable police report. Then I sat in the dark, listening to the rain, watching my sleeping girlfriend breathe, and tried to convince myself that this was nothing, a one-time thing, a glitch in the system that had let her through, a moment of weakness in whatever treatment she was supposed to be receiving. But I knew better. I'd learned the hard way that Vanessa Oates didn't send single messages. She didn't make one attempt and give up. When she reached out, it was always the beginning of something, the first drop of rain before a flood. My phone lit up again. Another notification, another message request from another new account, this one with a different string of random characters. You blocked me. That wasn't very nice, Marcus. We have so much to talk about. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I told Amy everything over breakfast, watched her face shift from confusion to concern to something that looked a lot like fear as I laid out the history, the obsession, the harassment, the restraining order, the institutionalization. She'd known the broad strokes already, but I'd never given her the full picture. Never wanted to burden her with the details of just how bad it had gotten, how close Vanessa had come to destroying my life completely. By the time I finished, her coffee had gone cold, and her hands were trembling slightly on the tabletop. "So she's been in a psychiatric facility for almost 5 years," Amy said slowly, processing. "And now she's somehow sending you Instagram messages at 3 in the morning. Multiple messages from multiple accounts. Every time I blocked one, another appeared. I'd blocked 7 accounts before I finally just turned off my notifications entirely, and when I checked again at dawn, there were 4 more waiting, each one slightly more insistent than the last, each one reminding me that she knew where I lived, where I worked, who I was with. "We need to call the police." "I know, I will. But first I need to find out if she's actually out." I'd already been researching, scrolling through news articles and public records while Amy slept, trying to find any mention of Vanessa Oates being released from the facility in Ohio. I'd found nothing. No news stories, no social media posts from her family, no indication that anything had changed. If she's still supposed to be committed, then either she escaped or someone is using her name to mess with me. Who would do that? I didn't have an answer. Vanessa had been a loner even before her breakdown, the kind of person who drifted through life without forming deep connections. I couldn't imagine her having friends who'd continue her campaign of harassment on her behalf. But I also couldn't imagine the alternative, that she'd somehow gotten out, somehow tracked me across the country, somehow found her way into my carefully reconstructed life without triggering any of the alerts I'd set up. I called the facility first. It took 20 minutes to get transferred to someone who could actually access patient information, and another 10 to verify my identity and explain my connection to Vanessa. The administrator who finally came on the line had a careful, measured voice that immediately put me on edge. "Mr. Chen, I'm afraid I can't discuss specific patient details with you, but I can tell you that we take the safety of our patients and the public very seriously, and all appropriate protocols are being followed." That's not an answer. Is Vanessa Oates still in your facility or not? A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was even more careful than before. "I'm not able to confirm or deny the current status of any patient, but I would strongly encourage you to contact your local law enforcement if you have safety concerns." She wouldn't say anything else. I hung up feeling worse than before, that non-answer hanging in the air like a threat. If Vanessa was still there, the administrator would have just said so. The fact that she couldn't confirm it meant something had changed, something they didn't want to admit. I called the police next, filed a report, explained the history, showed them the screenshots I'd taken. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but not particularly reassuring. Without proof that Vanessa was actually behind the accounts, without any direct threats of violence, there wasn't much they could do. They'd make a note of it. They'd increase patrols in my neighborhood. They'd reach out to the facility in Ohio to verify her status. But beyond that, I was on my own. The messages kept coming throughout the day. I'd turned off notifications, but every time I checked my phone, there were more requests waiting. The tone was shifting, becoming less conversational and more possessive. She started talking about our relationship, as if it were a real thing, as if we'd had something precious that I'd thrown away. She talked about the years she'd spent in the facility, how she'd used that time to get better, to understand what she'd done wrong, to become someone I could finally love the way she deserved to be loved. "I've changed, Marcus," one message read. "I'm not the person I was. I just want a chance to show you. We could be so happy together if you'd just stop fighting it." Another, "Why do you keep blocking me? I'm trying to have a conversation. I'm trying to be civilized. But you keep shutting me out like I'm nothing. Like I don't matter. Do you have any idea how much that hurts?" And then, around 3 in the afternoon, a message that made my blood run cold. Amy left for work at 8:15 this morning. She was wearing the blue dress, the one with the white flowers. It looks nice on her. But you shouldn't have let her leave alone. The streets aren't safe these days. I was at Amy's office within 20 minutes, my heart pounding the entire drive. She was fine, confused and a little frightened by my sudden appearance, but fine. I showed her the message, watched the color drain from her face as she realized what it meant. Vanessa had been watching our apartment that morning. She'd been close enough to see what Amy was wearing when she left. She might still be out there right now, watching, waiting. We went to the police station together this time. The same officer who'd taken my report that morning looked more concerned now, especially when I showed him the message about Amy. This was specific. This was surveillance. This was the kind of escalation that came before something worse. "We'll put out a bolo for Vanessa Oates," he said, "and I'd recommend you both vary your routines as much as possible. Don't go to the same places at the same times. Stay aware of your surroundings. If you see anything suspicious, call us immediately." It was good advice, practical advice, but it didn't make me feel any safer. That night, Amy and I lay in bed together, listening to the rain that had started up again, neither of us able to sleep. I'd checked every lock twice, closed every blind, pushed a chair under the front door handle. My phone sat on the nightstand, silenced but still lighting up every few minutes with new notifications. I'd stopped reading them. I didn't need to. I knew what they would say. She was out there somewhere, watching, waiting, getting closer, and I had no idea how to stop her. The first physical sign appeared 3 days later. I'd been checking the mail in the lobby of our building, sorting through bills and junk, when I noticed an envelope with no stamp, no return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately. That looping, almost childish script that had appeared on dozens of notes during the worst years of my life. She'd been in my building. She'd touched the same mailbox I was touching now, had stood in this same lobby, had walked these same halls. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a photograph, printed on glossy paper like something from a drugstore photo kiosk. It showed me and Amy sitting at our kitchen table, visible through the window of our apartment. The angle was from across the street, maybe from the roof of the parking garage that overlooked our building. We were eating dinner, completely unaware that we were being watched, completely oblivious to the person out there in the dark pointing a camera at our lives. On the back, she'd written, "You look so happy, but you're not supposed to be happy with her. You're supposed to be happy with me." I showed the photograph to the police that afternoon. They took it seriously. This was stalking now, unambiguous and documented, but their options were still limited. They didn't know where Vanessa was staying, didn't know what name she might be using, didn't have the resources to stake out my building 24 hours a day. They'd keep looking, they'd keep investigating, but in the meantime, I needed to be careful, as if being careful could stop someone who'd crossed 3,000 miles to find me. Amy wanted to leave, wanted us to pack up and go to her parents' house upstate, put distance between ourselves and whatever was happening. Part of me agreed with her. The smart thing to do would be to disappear, the way I'd disappeared 5 years ago, start over somewhere new where Vanessa couldn't find us. But another part of me, the part that had spent years in therapy learning to reclaim my life, refused to run again. I'd already given up everything once because of her. I wasn't going to let her take this from me too. We compromised. Amy went to stay with her sister in New Jersey for a few days, just until the police had more information. I stayed behind, partly because someone needed to be there if Vanessa tried to make contact again, and partly because I was done hiding. If she wanted to confront me, I'd rather it happen on my terms than hers. The messages had slowed down, which should have been reassuring but wasn't. The flood of Instagram requests had dwindled to a trickle and then to nothing. Either she'd given up, which seemed impossible, or she'd decided that digital communication wasn't enough anymore. She'd delivered her message in person now. She'd proven she could reach me. Whatever came next would be more direct. I started noticing things, small things, the kind of details that could be paranoia or could be proof that someone was watching. A car I didn't recognize parked across the street for hours at a time. A woman in a hoodie standing at the bus stop who seemed to be looking at my building instead of waiting for the bus. Footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment that would stop at my door and then continue on as if someone had paused to listen. On the fourth night alone, I woke up at 2 a.m. to find a notification on my phone. Not Instagram this time. A text message from an unknown number containing nothing but a photograph. It was a picture of my front door, taken from the hallway, time-stamped 12 minutes ago. I was out of bed before I fully processed what I was seeing, grabbing the baseball bat I'd started keeping by the nightstand, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything over the rush of blood in my ears. I crept toward the front door, the bat raised, my phone clutched in my other hand, ready to dial 911. The hallway was silent. The apartment was silent. Everything was silent except for the rain against the windows and my own ragged breathing. I looked through the peephole. Empty. The hallway outside was empty, just beige carpet and fluorescent lighting, and the doors of my neighbors' apartments all closed, all still. But something was different. Something on my door, on the outside, that I couldn't quite make out through the distorted fisheye of the peephole. I unlocked the deadbolt as quietly as I could, turned the handle, eased the door open just a crack. There was a rose taped to the outside of my door, a single red rose, the stem wrapped in a wet paper towel to keep it fresh, with a note attached. I didn't need to read the note to know what it would say, but I read it anyway, standing there in my doorway at 2 a.m. with a baseball bat in my hand and terror clawing at my chest. I'm so close now, Marcus. Can you feel me? I'm right here. I've always been right here. I slammed the door shut, locked it, shoved the bookcase in front of it for good measure. Then I called 911 and told them someone was stalking me, that she'd just been at my door, that she might still be in the building. The operator kept me on the line until the officers arrived, and they searched the building floor by floor, checked the stairwells and the roof and the parking garage across the street. They found nothing. No sign of Vanessa. No evidence of where she'd gone. Just the rose, still taped to my door, already starting to wilt in the warm air of the hallway, and the note with its promise that she was close, that she'd always been close. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. Didn't sleep much for the nights that followed. I'd lie awake listening to every sound, analyzing every creak, wondering if that footstep in the hallway was a neighbor coming home late or something else entirely. The police were doing what they could, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Vanessa had found me, and she was done waiting. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Amy's sister, scrolling through social media while Amy sat beside her trying to distract herself, noticed something strange. A new account had started following several of Amy's friends, people who'd never had any connection to me, people Amy had known since childhood. The account was private, with no posts and a generic profile picture, but the username caught her attention. It was Amy's mother's maiden name combined with the year Amy was born. Someone had been researching Amy's life the same way they'd researched mine, building a map of her connections, her history, her vulnerabilities, and whoever it was had made a mistake. They'd used information that only someone who'd been deep diving into Amy's family history would know. I took this to the detective who'd been assigned to my case, a tired-looking woman named Reyes, who'd been working stalking cases for 15 years and had seen everything. She didn't seem surprised by what I showed her, but something in her expression sharpened. This was a pattern she recognized. This was the kind of obsessive research that preceded escalation. We got confirmation from Ohio this morning, she told me. Vanessa Oates was released from the facility 8 months ago, outpatient treatment, supervised living arrangement, but she stopped showing up for her appointments about 3 months back, dropped off the radar completely. 8 months. She'd been out for 8 months, and no one had thought to notify me. No one had thought that the man she'd been obsessively stalking might want to know that his stalker was free. We're treating this as a credible threat now, Detective Reyes continued. I've got officers looking into recent rentals in your area, running her photo through facial recognition on any security footage we can access. But I need you to be realistic, Mr. Chen. She's had months to set this up. She knows your patterns, your schedule, probably more about your life than you realize. Until we find her, you need to act like she could be anywhere. I went home that afternoon, feeling worse than I had since this started. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city damp and gray, puddles reflecting a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to clear or darken again. I climbed the stairs to my apartment on autopilot, already thinking about what I'd pack, where Amy and I could go, how long we'd have to run before this was over. I was fitting my key into the lock when I noticed the door was already open. Just a crack, barely visible, but enough to make my heart stop. I hadn't left it open. I was certain of that. I'd checked the locks 3 times before leaving that morning, the way I checked them every morning now. Someone had been inside. Someone might still be inside. I should have called the police. Should have backed away, gone to a neighbor's apartment, waited for help to arrive. But something pulled me forward. Some need to know, to see, to confront whatever was waiting for me on the other side of that door. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking in the silence, and stepped into my apartment. At first, everything looked normal. The furniture was where I'd left it, the dishes still in the sink from that morning's breakfast, the TV remote on the couch where I'd tossed it. But then, I noticed the details. A chair pulled out from the kitchen table, angled toward the window like someone had been sitting there, watching the street below. A coffee cup on the counter that I hadn't used, still warm when I touched it. And on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet I didn't recognize, a photograph. It was a picture of me from years ago. College, probably junior year, taken at some party I barely remembered. I was smiling at the camera, young and oblivious, and standing next to me with her arm wrapped possessively around my waist was Vanessa Oates. I didn't remember taking that picture, didn't remember her arm around me, didn't remember standing that close to her, didn't remember any moment where we'd looked like what this photograph suggested we were. But there it was, printed in glossy color, proof of a relationship that had never existed anywhere except inside her head. There was writing on the back. I pulled the photo off the fridge with trembling hands and turned it over. I've been waiting so long for us to be together again. Tonight, we finally will be. Don't try to run, Marcus. I'll always find you. Tonight. She was planning something for tonight. I called Detective Reyes immediately, told her about the break-in, the photograph, the message. She dispatched officers to my apartment within minutes, and they swept the building again, checked every closet and corner and crawl space they could find. They dusted for prints, photographed the evidence, took statements from neighbors who hadn't seen anything unusual. One of them mentioned that a maintenance worker had been in the building that afternoon, checking something in the basement. A woman, maybe, though they couldn't be sure. They hadn't gotten a good look. A maintenance worker. Of course. That's how she'd been getting in, pretending to be staff, wearing a uniform, carrying tools that made her look like she belonged. She'd done the same thing in college, I remembered suddenly. Had borrowed a janitorial uniform once to get into my dorm after I'd stopped answering my door. The same trick, 5 years later, and it had worked just as well. The police offered to post an officer outside my door for the night, and I accepted. But even with protection, even with someone standing guard just feet away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Vanessa had been playing this game for months. She'd infiltrated my building, my life, my sense of safety. One officer wasn't going to stop her. Nothing was going to stop her until she got what she wanted. I sat in my apartment as darkness fell, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor, listening to every sound from the hallway outside. The rain started up again around 9, drumming against the windows in steady waves. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was waiting, preparing, getting ready for whatever she'd planned. And all I could do was wait for her to make her move. She came through the fire escape. I'd been so focused on the front door, so reassured by the officer stationed in the hallway, that I'd forgotten about the window in my bedroom. The one that opened onto the rusted metal staircase running down the back of the building. The one I never used because the latch was temperamental, and the drop to the alley below made me nervous. I'd checked it that afternoon, made sure it was locked, but locks hadn't stopped Vanessa before. Nothing had ever stopped Vanessa before. I was in the living room when I heard the sound, a soft scraping, metal on metal coming from the bedroom. I froze, my whole body going rigid, and listened as the window slid open with a groan of old wood and older hinges. Footsteps on the floor, slow, deliberate, approaching the bedroom door. I should have called out to the officer in the hall, should have screamed, should have run, should have done anything except stand there paralyzed while the bedroom door swung open and Vanessa Oates stepped into my apartment for the first time in 5 years. She looked different than I remembered. Thinner, harder, with a gauntness to her face that spoke of sleepless nights and obsessive focus. Her hair was shorter, dyed a darker shade than her natural brown, and she was wearing the same kind of nondescript maintenance uniform she'd used to infiltrate the building. But her eyes were exactly the same. That intensity, that certainty, that absolute conviction that what she was doing was right and inevitable. Marcus. She said my name like a prayer, like a promise. I knew you'd wait for me. I knew you'd understand eventually. Vanessa. My voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. You need to leave. There's a police officer right outside. If I call out, you won't. She smiled, and there was something broken in it, something that had shattered years ago and never healed right. You've been waiting for this too, all those years, all that distance. You were just confused. But I'm here now. I can help you understand. She started moving toward me, and I backed away, keeping the couch between us like it could somehow protect me. My phone was on the coffee table, just a few feet away, but she was closer to it than I was. The baseball bat was in the bedroom, useless now. I had nothing. I've thought about this moment for so long, she continued, her voice dreamy and distant. What I'd say to you, how I'd make you see. We were always meant to be together, Marcus. From the moment I saw you in that classroom, I knew. And I know you felt it too. You were just scared. People get scared of things they don't understand. I never felt anything for you. The words came out harsher than I intended, years of suppressed anger finally breaking through. We were never together. We were never going to be together. What you felt, what you still feel, it's not real. It was never real. Her expression flickered. Just for a second, something dark passed behind her eyes, something that looked less like love and more like rage. Then it was gone, smoothed over by that same serene smile. You don't mean that. You're just confused again, but that's okay. I can be patient. I've been patient for 5 years. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out something that caught the light. A knife, small but sharp, the kind you'd use to open boxes or cut through tape. I didn't want to do this. I wanted us to talk, to reconnect, to find our way back to each other naturally. But you keep fighting me. You keep running, and I'm tired of chasing. Help! The scream tore out of me before I could think, loud enough to echo through the apartment, loud enough to reach the officer in the hall. She's in here! Help! Everything happened fast after that. The front door burst open, the officer rushing in with his weapon drawn, shouting commands that seemed to come from very far away. Vanessa turned toward the commotion, the knife still in her hand, and for one terrible moment, I thought she was going to attack him, thought this was going to end in blood and gunfire and tragedy. But she didn't attack. She just stood there, looking at the officer and then back at me, and something in her face crumpled. That certainty, that conviction, it collapsed like a building coming down, leaving behind nothing but confusion and grief and a kind of childlike bewilderment that was almost worse than the rage. Marcus? She said my name like a question, like she didn't understand what was happening, like she'd woken up from a dream to find herself somewhere she didn't recognize. Why are you doing this? I just wanted to talk. I just wanted us to be together. They took her away in handcuffs, still asking questions I couldn't answer, still looking at me with those eyes that saw something I'd never been. The knife clattered to the floor when they cuffed her, and I stared at it for a long time after she was gone, thinking about how close it had come, how close she had come, how differently this night could have ended. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Vanessa was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and remanded to a maximum security psychiatric facility, a different one this time, with stricter protocols and better oversight. Her lawyer argued that she'd never intended to hurt me, that the knife was just for self-defense, that she genuinely believed we were in a relationship. The prosecution argued that intent didn't matter when someone broke into your home in the middle of the night with a weapon. The jury sided with the defense, but the result was the same either way. She'd be locked up for years, maybe decades, maybe forever. Amy came back after the verdict. We talked for a long time about what had happened, what it meant, whether we could move forward together. I told her I'd understand if she wanted to leave, if this was too much, if my past had become too dangerous for her future. She told me to stop being an idiot and helped me pack up the apartment. We moved to a new city, a new state, a new life. I changed my name on social media, locked down every privacy setting, became a ghost in the digital world the same way I'd tried to become a ghost in the physical one 5 years earlier. Detective Reyes promised to notify me if Vanessa's status ever changed, and I set up alerts for her name, her case number, any mention of her in any database I could access. I still check my phone every night before bed. Still feel my heart rate spike when an unknown notification appears. Still dream sometimes about that moment when the bedroom door opened and she stepped through, that knife glinting in her hand, that broken smile on her face. The fear doesn't go away. It just becomes something you carry, something that's always there in the background, a weight you learn to live with. But I refuse to let her define my life. I refuse to spend the rest of my years looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, treating every stranger as a potential threat. Vanessa took enough from me already. I won't let her take anything more. Some nights, when the rain is falling and the city is quiet, I lie awake next to Amy and listen to her breathe. I think about how close I came to losing this, how close I came to losing everything, and I'm grateful, fiercely, desperately grateful that I'm still here, that we're still here, that the nightmare is finally over. At least, I hope it's over. My phone hasn't lit up with an unknown notification in almost a year, but I still keep it face down on the nightstand, just in case. Old habits die hard, and some fears never really go away. Story 3. The voice at the gas station, asking me not to leave. I almost didn't stop. The gas gauge had been hovering just above empty for the last 40 miles, and I'd been telling myself I could make it to the next town, the next well-lit station with security cameras and other customers and the comforting bustle of civilization. But the highway had gotten darker and emptier with each passing mile. The rain had picked up until my wipers could barely keep pace, and when the faded sign for Murphy's Gas and Go appeared through the downpour like a ghost materializing from fog, something in me gave up the fight. It was just past 2 a.m. I'd been driving for almost 7 hours, pushing through from my mother's house in Ohio after a visit that had left me drained and desperate to get home. She was sick. Cancer, stage 3, the kind of news that rearranges your entire understanding of time and mortality. And I'd spent 3 days watching her pretend to be strong while I pretended not to notice how thin she'd gotten. The drive back to Virginia was supposed to be a chance to decompress, to process, to let the monotony of the road quiet my racing thoughts. Instead, it had just given me 7 hours alone with my grief and an increasingly urgent need for gasoline. The station was the only light for miles, a small concrete building with 2 ancient pumps out front, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. The fluorescent lights above the pumps buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made the rain look like falling static. There were no other cars in the lot, no attendant visible through the grimy windows of the convenience store. Just me and my Honda and the endless dark pressing in from all sides. I pulled up to the pump closest to the building and killed the engine. The silence that followed was almost physical, a weight that settled over the car the moment my headlights went dark. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof, watching the water sheet down my windows and blur the world outside into something impressionistic and strange. Everything in me wanted to start the car again, to keep driving, to take my chances on fumes rather than step out into this place that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. But I needed gas. That was the simple, unavoidable truth. So I grabbed my wallet, pulled my hood up against the rain, and stepped out into the night. The cold hit me first, that particular late autumn chill that cuts through whatever you're wearing and settles into your bones. The rain was lighter than it had looked from inside the car, more mist than downpour now, but it still soaked into my jacket within seconds. I swiped my card at the pump, selected regular, and stood there shivering while the ancient machine whirred and clicked, and finally began dispensing fuel at a pace that suggested it might take all night. That's when I heard the voice. "Please don't leave." I spun around, my heart lurching in my chest. The parking lot was empty. The convenience store windows showed nothing but darkness and the faint shapes of shelves inside. There was no one there, no one I could see anyway, but the voice had been clear, close, right behind me almost, like someone had leaned in to whisper directly into my ear. "Hello?" My own voice came out thin and reedy, swallowed by the rain and the dark. "Is someone there?" Silence. Just the hiss of gasoline flowing into my tank and the distant rumble of thunder somewhere over the hills. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the shadows around the building, looking for movement, for any sign of another person. Nothing. The station was as empty as it had been when I pulled in. I told myself I'd imagined it, exhaustion and grief playing tricks on my mind, conjuring voices from the white noise of the rain. It had been a long drive, a long week. My brain was looking for patterns in chaos, finding meaning where there was none. I turned back to the pump, watched the numbers slowly tick upward, and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. The pump clicked off at $32.18. I replaced the nozzle, grabbed my receipt, and turned toward my car. A woman was standing between me and the driver's door. I screamed, couldn't help it, the sound tearing out of me before I could stop it. She was maybe 10 feet away, standing perfectly still in the rain, wearing a dress that looked like it had been white once, but was now stained with something dark and wet. Her hair was plastered to her face, hanging in lank strands over features I couldn't quite make out in the flickering light. She wasn't looking at me exactly. She was looking past me, at something over my shoulder, her head tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn. "Please don't leave," she said again, and this time I recognized the voice. The same voice I'd heard before, except now I could see where it was coming from. "If you leave, he'll get you too." I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The woman stood there in the rain, motionless as a statue, and I felt every primitive alarm in my brain firing at once. "Run!" they screamed. "Run now! Get in your car! Get out of here!" But she was between me and the door, and I didn't know what would happen if I tried to push past her, didn't know what she would do. "Who?" I finally managed. "Who will get me?" She raised one hand and pointed, not at me, behind me, toward the convenience store with its dark windows and its flickering lights and its absolute, terrible stillness. "Him?" she whispered. "He's been waiting. He's always waiting. And now that you've stopped, he knows you're here." I turned to look at the store. The windows were still dark. The door was still closed. Nothing had changed, but I could have sworn, just for a second, that I saw something move behind the glass. A shape, a shadow, something that had been watching this whole time. When I turned back, the woman was gone, and the lights above the pumps went out, plunging me into darkness. For a moment, I couldn't see anything. The darkness was absolute, the kind of black that presses against your eyes and makes you doubt whether they're even open. Then my vision started to adjust, and I could make out shapes. The pump beside me, the outline of my car, the squat silhouette of the convenience store against a sky that was only marginally lighter than the ground below. I ran for my car, didn't think, didn't hesitate, just bolted across the wet concrete with my keys already in my hand. my thumb jamming the unlock button so hard I could feel the plastic digging into my skin. The door opened. I threw myself inside, and I slammed it shut behind me with enough force to rock the whole vehicle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. But I managed, and the engine turned over on the first try. The headlights blazed to life, cutting 2 bright cones through the darkness. The convenience store lit up in their glare, and standing in front of the door, exactly where the woman had been pointing, was a man. He was tall, impossibly tall, with proportions that seemed stretched and wrong even from this distance. He was wearing something dark, a uniform maybe, the kind an attendant might wear, but I couldn't make out any features on his face. It was like trying to look at something that existed just outside my ability to perceive it, a shape that my eyes refused to focus on no matter how hard I stared. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing my car, his head tilted at that same wrong angle the woman's had been, watching me. I threw the car into reverse and floored it. The tires screamed against the wet pavement, and the Honda lurched backward so fast I nearly lost control. I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to put distance between myself and that station and whatever was standing in front of it. I spun the wheel, shifted into drive, and accelerated toward the highway entrance with my foot pressed flat against the floor. My rear-view mirror showed the station shrinking behind me. The man was still standing there, still watching, growing smaller and smaller, until the rain swallowed him completely. I kept my foot on the gas until the station had vanished entirely, until there was nothing behind me but darkness and empty road and the drumming of rain on metal. I drove for maybe 5 miles before I realized something was wrong. The highway should have been getting busier by now. Even at 2 a.m, there should have been occasional headlights, passing trucks, some sign of other life on the road, but there was nothing. Just me and my Honda and an endless ribbon of asphalt stretching into a darkness that seemed to go on forever. The mile markers weren't making sense either. I'd passed the same one twice now, green signs with white numbers that should have been counting upward, but instead seemed to be repeating, looping, cycling through a sequence that led nowhere. And the gas gauge, which had been nearly full when I left the station, was sinking toward empty again. I pulled over to the shoulder and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The rain had intensified again, hammering against the roof in sheets, and in the rhythm of it, I could almost hear words. Please don't leave. Please don't leave. Over and over, like a mantra, like a warning I'd ignored. The woman had tried to tell me, if you leave, he'll get you too. I'd assumed she meant I should drive away, escape, put as much distance between myself and that station as possible. But what if she'd meant the opposite? What if leaving was exactly what he wanted me to do? I looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was dark, empty, stretching back toward a horizon I couldn't see. But there was something on the asphalt, maybe a quarter-mile back, a shape standing in the center of the lane, motionless despite the rain and the dark. Too far away to see clearly, but I knew what it was. I knew who it was. He was following me, and no matter how far I drove, I wasn't getting any farther away. The engine coughed, just once, a small stutter that made my heart lurch, and then it smoothed out again. But the gas gauge was still dropping, impossibly fast now, like the tank was draining itself directly onto the road. I had maybe 10 minutes of fuel left, maybe less. And when the car died, I'd be alone on this empty highway with that thing getting closer. I thought about the woman again, her stained dress, her lank hair, the way she'd appeared between one blink and the next. She'd been a warning, I realized now. A victim, maybe. Someone who'd stopped at that station before me and hadn't been able to leave. She'd tried to help me, tried to tell me what was coming, and I'd run anyway, driven straight into whatever trap he'd set. Please don't leave. She hadn't been asking me to escape. She'd been asking me to stay at the station, to refuse to play his game, to break whatever cycle kept this road looping back on itself. The shape in my rearview mirror was closer now. I hadn't seen it move, but it was definitely closer, maybe 100 yards back. Standing in the center of the road, that wrong silhouette stark against the darkness behind it. Waiting, patient. I had a choice. I could keep driving, keep burning fuel I didn't have, keep trying to outrun something that didn't obey the rules of distance or time, or I could turn around, go back to the station, face whatever was waiting there instead of whatever was following me here. The engine coughed again. The gauge dipped below the red line. I turned the car around and started driving back toward Murphy's Gas and Go, toward the flickering lights and the dark windows and the thing that had been waiting for me all along. If I was going to die tonight, I wanted to understand why. The station materialized out of the rain like it had been waiting for me. One moment, there was nothing but empty highway and darkness, and the next, the faded sign for Murphy's Gas and Go was glowing in my headlights, the pumps standing silent sentinel in the downpour. I pulled in slowly this time, easing the car into the same spot I'd occupied before, and killed the engine with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere in the last few miles. Fear had crystallized into something else, something colder and harder, something that felt almost like resolve. The lights above the pumps were on again, buzzing and flickering the way they had when I first arrived, casting that same sickly yellow glow over the wet concrete. The convenience store windows were still dark, but I could see shapes inside now, shelves, a counter, the outline of a register. Normal things, the kind of things you'd expect to find in a place like this. But there was nothing normal about Murphy's Gas and Go. I knew that now. I got out of the car and stood in the rain, letting it soak through my jacket, not caring anymore about the cold. The woman was there again, standing by the edge of the building where the light met the shadow. She looked more solid this time, more real, and when she turned to face me, I could see her features clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a face that might have been pretty once, but was now frozen in an expression of exhausted terror. The stains on her dress were dark red. Blood, I realized. Old blood, dried into the fabric like it had been there for years. "You came back," she said. Not a question, a statement tinged with something that sounded almost like relief. I didn't have a choice. I walked toward her slowly, keeping my distance but close enough to talk without shouting. The road doesn't go anywhere. It just loops back. And I gestured toward the store. He was following me, getting closer. She nodded, and something in her expression softened. That's what he does. He lets you run, lets you think you're escaping. But the road always brings you back, and he's always waiting. The only way out is through. Through what? Through him? Through understanding. She turned toward the store, and I followed her gaze to those dark windows, that closed door, that building that felt less like a structure and more like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. He wasn't always like this. He was a person once, Earl Murphy. He owned this station for 30 years, and for most of that time he was just a man. Lonely, maybe. Strange, but human. What changed? The highway did. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the fact that she was already dead. When they built the interstate, it bypassed this stretch of road. Nobody came through anymore. Earl watched his business die, watched the customers stop coming, watched himself become invisible, and something in him broke. He decided that if people wouldn't stop voluntarily, he'd make them stop. I felt sick. The pieces were coming together in a way I didn't want them to. He killed them. He needed them, needed their fear, their desperation, their life. Every person who stopped here, who filled their tank and tried to leave, he took something from them. At first it was just money, possessions, things they could live without. But then it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted everything. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. By the time he died, he'd killed 17 people, buried them out back, behind the dumpsters where nobody would ever look. And whatever he'd become by then, whatever he'd fed with all that suffering, it didn't die with him. It stayed. 17 people, 17 lives, ended in this place, their bodies rotting in unmarked graves while the highway roared past without stopping. I thought about the woman in front of me, her bloody dress, her frozen terror. She was one of them, one of the 17. How do I stop him? I asked. How do I get out of here? You can't stop him, not really. He's been here too long, fed on too much, but you can refuse to play his game. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the raindrops passing through her instead of hitting her. He wants you to run, wants you to fight, wants you to give him something to chase, something to hunt. But if you don't run, if you stand your ground and refuse to be afraid, he can't touch me? No. Her voice dropped, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Shame, maybe, or regret. He can still touch you. He can still kill you, but it's harder for him when you're not afraid. The fear is what feeds him. Without it, he's weaker, slower, more like the man he used to be instead of the thing he became. I stood there in the rain, processing what she was telling me. Don't run, don't fight, don't be afraid. Stand your ground and refuse to give him what he wants. It sounded like a suicide mission. It sounded like the kind of advice that would get me killed, but I didn't have any other options. What's your name? I asked suddenly. I didn't know why it mattered, but it felt important somehow. Like she deserved to be more than just a warning, more than just a ghost in a bloody dress. Sarah. She smiled, just barely, and for a moment she looked almost alive. Sarah Mercer. I stopped here in 1987. I was driving home from a concert. I was 23 years old. I'm sorry, Sarah. Don't be sorry. Just survive. She started to fade, her edges blurring, her form becoming translucent. He's coming. I can feel it. Whatever you do, whatever happens, don't let him see you're afraid. She vanished, and behind me, I heard the door to the convenience store creak open. I didn't turn around. I could feel him there, standing in the doorway, watching me with eyes that I knew wouldn't focus if I looked at them. The air temperature dropped, plunging from cold to freezing in the space of a breath, and I could hear something that might have been footsteps approaching across the wet concrete. Slow, deliberate, patient. Don't be afraid. Don't run. Don't give him what he wants. I closed my eyes and thought about my mother. Thought about the way she'd hugged me goodbye, how thin she'd felt in my arms, how she'd whispered that she loved me and that I should drive safe. I thought about getting home, about seeing her again, about all the things I still wanted to do with whatever time we had left. The footsteps stopped right behind me. I could feel his presence like a weight on my back, like something pressing against my spine, cold and heavy and hungry. He was waiting for me to break, waiting for me to scream, to run, to give him the fear he needed to tear me apart. I opened my eyes and stood my ground. I'm not afraid of you, I said. The words came out steadier than I expected. You're just a sad old man who couldn't handle being forgotten, and I'm not going to let you make me another victim. The presence behind me didn't move, but I felt something shift in the air. Confusion, maybe, or frustration. Something that wasn't used to being defied. The cold intensified. It wrapped around me like a fist, squeezing the breath from my lungs, and I felt ice crystals forming on my eyelashes, on the fine hairs of my arms, on every exposed inch of skin. He was trying to break me through sheer physical discomfort, trying to make the fear come back by reminding me how fragile my body was, how easily it could be damaged. I gritted my teeth and refused to shiver. You think you're different. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a low rasp that seemed to vibrate through the concrete beneath my feet. They all think they're different. They all think they're brave, but in the end, they all run. They all scream. They all give me exactly what I need. I still didn't turn around, kept my eyes fixed on the pumps, on my car, on the rain falling through the flickering light. Maybe they did, but I'm not running, and I'm not screaming. So what are you going to do now? The laughter that followed was the worst sound I'd ever heard. It wasn't human laughter. It was something that had learned to imitate laughter by watching people die. by cataloging their final desperate sounds and stitching them together into something that resembled joy. It crawled across my skin like insects, burrowed into my ears like worms, made me want to clap my hands over my head and curl into a ball on the wet ground. I didn't. I stood there, rigid, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to draw blood. "You're afraid." He was closer now. I could feel the cold radiating off him like heat from an open oven, except inverted, wrong. "You're terrified. I can taste it on you, the same way I tasted it on all the others. You're just better at hiding it." "Maybe," I admitted. My voice was steady, but he wasn't wrong. Underneath the resolve, underneath the determination, there was a core of pure animal terror that wanted nothing more than to bolt. "But hiding it is enough. You need me to break. You need me to give in. And I won't." The presence shifted behind me. I heard movement, footsteps circling, coming around to my left side, and I forced myself to keep staring straight ahead. If I looked at him, if I saw whatever he'd become, I wasn't sure I could maintain this facade of calm. Better to face the abstract threat than the specific horror. "Sarah told you about me." His voice was coming from beside me now, barely 3 feet away. I could see something in my peripheral vision, a darkness that was darker than the night around it, a shape that hurt to look at even indirectly. "She always tries to help them, tells them my story, gives them little tips about how to survive. It never works. They still die. They still feed me. And then they join her, trapped here forever, watching me take the next one and the next one and the next one." 17 people, I said. "Sarah told me you killed 17 people before you died. How many since?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. The cold wavered just for a moment, and I felt something like surprise emanating from the shape beside me. "You want to know numbers? You want to quantify what I am?" "I want to understand." Sarah said the only way out is through understanding. I finally turned my head, just slightly, just enough to face the direction his voice was coming from. I still couldn't see him clearly. My eyes refused to focus, sliding off his form like water off glass. But I could feel him there, could sense the outline of something that had once been human and was now something else entirely. "You were lonely. The world forgot about you, and it hurt so much that you decided to make people pay for it. But killing them didn't help, did it? It just made you lonelier, made you more forgotten. No one even knows this place exists anymore. No one stops here except by accident." "Shut up. The highway goes right past you. Thousands of cars every day, and none of them even see you. You're still invisible, Earl. You're still nobody. The only difference is, now you're nobody with a body count." "Shut up." The cold hit me like a physical blow. It lifted me off my feet and threw me backward, and I hit the concrete hard enough to knock the wind out of me. Pain exploded through my spine, my shoulders, the back of my skull. I lay there gasping, staring up at the rain falling through the flickering light, watching the drops descend toward my face like tiny missiles. He was above me now. I could feel the weight of his presence pressing down, pinning me to the ground, and for the first time I could see him clearly. The stretched proportions, the 2 long limbs, the face that was nothing but shadow and hunger. He had no eyes, but I could feel him looking at me, could feel his attention boring into my skull like a drill. "You want to understand?" His voice was a hiss, a rasp, a death rattle given form. "I'll show you understanding. I'll show you what I showed all of them, right before the end." The world went dark. Not the darkness of night, but something deeper. The darkness of a closed coffin, of a buried grave, of a forgotten place where no light had ever reached. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only lie there as images flooded my mind, images that weren't mine. A young woman in a white dress, stopping for gas on her way home from a concert. A man in a business suit, checking his phone while the pump ran. A mother with 2 children in the back seat, buying snacks for the road. face after face, life after life, each one ending the same way, in darkness, in cold, in the absolute certainty that no one would ever know what happened to them. 17 before he died, and after, dozens more, maybe hundreds, an endless parade of victims, each one forgotten as thoroughly as Earl Murphy himself had been. He wanted me to despair, wanted me to see the hopelessness of my situation, the futility of resistance. He was showing me his power, his permanence, the certainty that I would join this collection of lost souls and no one would ever know. But that wasn't what I saw. What I saw was loneliness. What I saw was a man who had needed so desperately to be remembered that he'd destroyed himself and everyone around him, and still hadn't gotten what he wanted. Every victim was a confession of failure. Every death was proof that Earl Murphy still didn't matter, still wasn't special, still was just a forgotten gas station on a forgotten road in the middle of nowhere. I started to laugh. It hurt. Everything hurt. My back and my head and the cold that had seeped into my bones. But I couldn't help it. The laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, genuine and uncontrolled, and I felt his grip on my mind falter as confusion replaced his certainty. "You're pathetic," I gasped between laughs. "All of this, the road that loops, the victims, the eternal haunting, and you're still exactly what you always were, invisible, forgettable, nobody." The darkness shattered. The cold released me, and I found myself lying on the concrete in front of the pumps, alone and aching but alive, staring up at a sky that was starting, just barely, to lighten in the east. I lay there for a long time, watching the stars fade as dawn crept across the horizon. My body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder, every muscle aching, every joint screaming, my head throbbing where it had hit the concrete. But underneath the pain was something else. A lightness, a sense that something had shifted, something had broken, something that had held this place in its grip for decades had finally loosened its fingers. Sarah appeared beside me, not suddenly this time, but gradually, like mist coalescing into form. She was looking at the convenience store, and when I followed her gaze, I understood why. The building was different. The walls were crumbling, the roof sagging, the windows so thick with grime and cobwebs that they were nearly opaque. This wasn't a functioning gas station anymore. This was a ruin, a husk, a place that had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. The pumps beside me were rusted and broken, their hoses cracked and hanging like dead snakes. The sign that had glowed so brightly in the darkness was dark now, several letters missing, barely legible. "You did it," Sarah said softly. "You actually did it. No one's ever made him that angry before. Angry enough to show himself fully. Angry enough to lose control." I pushed myself up onto my elbows, wincing at the pain that shot through my spine. "Is he gone?" "No. He'll never be completely gone. He's been here too long, fed on too much. But you hurt him. You made him feel small again, the way he felt before he started killing. It'll take him a long time to rebuild." She turned to look at me, and there were tears streaming down her translucent cheeks. Long enough for us to finally leave. Behind her, I could see other shapes materializing in the growing light, dozens of them, faint and flickering, gathered near the edge of the parking lot. Men and women of all ages, some in clothes from decades past, some in outfits I recognized from my own era. The victims. Earl Murphy's collection of forgotten souls, finally able to move on. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "You gave us something no one else could. You gave us an ending." She faded then, dissolving into the morning light like fog burning off a lake. The other shapes followed, one by one, until the parking lot was empty except for me and my car and the ruins of Murphy's Gas and Go. I got to my feet slowly, testing each limb to make sure it still worked. My car was where I'd left it, though it looked different now, covered in a layer of dust and dead leaves that hadn't been there before, like it had been sitting in this lot for years instead of hours. The keys were still in the ignition. When I turned them, The engine started on the first try, and the gas gauge showed a full tank. Fuller than it had been when I filled up, actually. Like someone had topped it off while I wasn't looking. I pulled out of the lot and onto the highway, watching the station shrink in my rearview mirror. In the dawn light, it looked exactly like what it was, an abandoned building on a dead stretch of road, forgotten by everyone who passed by. Just like its owner had been, just like its owner had always feared being. The highway was normal now. Other cars appeared within minutes, trucks and sedans and motorcycles, all going about their ordinary lives on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The mile markers counted upward the way they were supposed to. The signs pointed toward towns I recognized, toward the interstate, toward home. Whatever loop Earl had trapped me in, it was broken now. The road went where it was supposed to go. I drove straight through to Virginia. Didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't even pause to eat or use the bathroom. I just drove, watching the sun rise higher and the landscape shift from rural to suburban to urban, until I was pulling into my apartment complex and turning off the engine with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The doctors said the bruises on my back and head were consistent with a fall. Possible concussion, definitely some soft tissue damage. Nothing that wouldn't heal with time. I didn't try to explain what had really happened. Didn't try to tell them about the gas station or the ghost or the thing that had fed on fear for decades. Some stories aren't meant to be believed. Some stories are just meant to be survived. I called my mother that afternoon. Told her I loved her, that I'd come visit again soon, that I was sorry I'd left so abruptly after my last trip. She sounded tired, but happy to hear from me, and we talked for almost an hour about nothing in particular. Her garden, her neighbors, the book she was reading. Normal things, living things, the kind of things that matter when you've spent a night face to face with someone who forgot what being alive meant. I think about Murphy's Gas and go sometimes. Late at night, when I'm driving alone and the road stretches out empty in front of me, I'll see a sign for some forgotten exit and feel my heart rate spike. I'll grip the wheel a little tighter, press the gas a little harder, tell myself that I have enough fuel to make it to the next town. I don't stop at remote stations anymore. Don't stop anywhere that doesn't have other cars, other people, other signs of life. But I also think about Sarah, about the look on her face when she realized she could finally leave, finally rest, finally stop being a warning that no one ever heeded. I think about the dozens of souls who followed her into the light, freed after years or decades of being trapped with the thing that killed them. I gave them that, me, with my grief and my exhaustion and my stubborn refusal to give Earl Murphy what he wanted. Sometimes, the way you survive isn't by running. Sometimes it's by standing still, facing the thing that's hunting you, and refusing to be afraid. Or at least refusing to show it. I still get nervous at gas stations, still feel a prickle on the back of my neck when I'm pumping fuel alone in the dark. But I don't let it control me. I don't let the fear win, because I know now what fear feeds. I know what happens when you let it consume you, when you let it define you, when you let it turn you into something that exists only to hurt others. Earl Murphy was a cautionary tale before he was a monster. I won't become the same. My mother passed away 8 months later, peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by family. I was holding her hand when she went, and in that moment, in that final quiet breath, I thought about all the people who never got that chance. All the victims who died alone on a concrete lot in the middle of nowhere, whose families never knew what happened to them, who became nothing more than food for something that had forgotten how to be human. I survived Murphy's Gas and go. I got my ending, but I'll never stop being grateful for the voice that asked me not to leave. The voice that tried to warn me, to save me, to give me the knowledge I needed to make it through the night. Thank you, Sarah. I hope you found peace. I hope you all did. Story 4. The hospital elevator going to a closed floor. The elevator shouldn't have stopped on the 6th floor. I knew that because the 6th floor had been closed for almost 3 years, sealed off, according to the head of security who'd trained me, after a burst pipe had caused water damage extensive enough to make the whole wing unusable. The button for 6 had a piece of black tape over it, the kind of improvised solution that becomes permanent when budgets are tight and nobody wants to pay for a proper fix. I'd been working the overnight shift at St. Ambrose Memorial for almost 2 weeks, and in all that time, I'd never seen that button light up. But it lit up now. A soft amber glow bleeding through the edges of the tape, and then the elevator shuddered to a stop and the doors slid open onto darkness. I'd been heading down from the 8th floor, making my usual rounds, checking locked doors and empty hallways the way I'd done every night since I started this job. It was just past 3 in the morning, that dead hour, when even the night nurses seemed to move in slow motion, and the hospital felt less like a place of healing and more like a place of waiting. Waiting for morning, waiting for answers, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd taken this job because I needed something after getting laid off from the warehouse, because security work paid decent, and the overnight differential made it worth the disruption to my sleep schedule. I hadn't expected to love it, and I didn't. But I hadn't expected to be afraid either. Not until now. The 6th floor stretched out in front of me, visible only in the pale rectangle of light that spilled from the elevator. I could see maybe 15 feet down the corridor before the darkness swallowed everything. Abandoned wheelchairs pushed against the walls, a nurse's station with its computers dark and its chairs empty, ceiling tiles sagging in places where the water damage must have been worst. The smell hit me next, that particular mustiness of a place that had been sealed off and forgotten, layered over the antiseptic sharpness that permeated every inch of this hospital. But there was something else underneath, something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in a warm room. I should have pressed the close door button, should have hit the lobby and reported the malfunction to maintenance, let someone else deal with whatever was happening up here. But something held me in place, some instinct that felt less like curiosity and more like compulsion. The elevator doors started to close, and I found myself stepping forward, crossing the threshold onto the 6th floor before I could think better of it. The doors slid shut behind me. The light vanished, and I was standing alone in absolute darkness, my flashlight suddenly feeling very small and very inadequate in my hand. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the black, illuminating dust motes floating in air that hadn't been disturbed in years. Except that wasn't quite true, I realized as I swept the light across the floor. There were footprints in the dust, fresh ones, leading away from the elevator and down the corridor toward the wing that my training materials had labeled as Pediatric Oncology. Closed. Someone had been up here recently. Someone was maybe still up here, walking these abandoned halls in the middle of the night while the rest of the hospital slept. "Hello?" My voice echoed off the walls, flat and strange in the stillness. "Security. Is someone there?" No response. Just the hum of the hospital's ventilation system, muffled and distant, and the soft patter of rain against windows I couldn't see. The storm that had been threatening all evening had finally arrived, and I could hear it now, drumming against the glass somewhere in the darkness ahead. It should have been a comforting sound. Instead, it just made me feel more isolated, more cut off from the functioning world below. I followed the footprints. I don't know why. Some combination of duty and stubbornness and the nagging sense that if someone was up here, they probably shouldn't be. Homeless person seeking shelter, maybe. Or a patient who'd wandered off from one of the other floors, confused and lost in a part of the hospital they didn't know was closed. Either way, it was my job to find them. My job to make sure the building was secure. The pediatric oncology wing was at the end of the corridor, past rooms with doors that hung open on empty beds and equipment that had been left behind when the floor was evacuated. I caught glimpses of them as I passed, a child's drawing still taped to one wall, a mobile of paper stars hanging motionless above a bed stripped down to its mattress, a whiteboard with a name and date written in marker that had faded, but not disappeared. Emma. Day 47. I wondered who Emma was, wondered if she'd made it to day 48. the footprints led through the double doors at the end of the hall, the ones marked Pediatric Oncology in letters that had once been cheerful primary colors, but had faded to something sickly and pale. I pushed through them and found myself in what must have been the main ward, a large open room lined with beds, each one surrounded by the ghosts of medical equipment that had been removed but not forgotten. 4 stands with nothing to hold, heart monitors with dark screens, chairs where parents had once sat, watching their children fight battles they were too young to understand. The footprints ended in the center of the room. I swept my flashlight across the space, looking for whoever had made them. The beds were empty. The corners were empty. The whole ward was empty, as far as I could tell. Nothing but dust and decay and the lingering sadness of a place where children had come to die. But the footprints just stopped, right there, in the middle of the floor, like whoever had been walking had simply ceased to exist. I was still staring at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, when I heard the voice. It was small, high-pitched, the voice of a child, coming from somewhere behind me, somewhere near the doors I'd just walked through. "Are you here to take me home?" I spun around, my flashlight beam slashing through the darkness. The doors were closed. I hadn't heard them close, but they were definitely shut now, blocking my exit. And standing in front of them, just at the edge of my light, was a girl. She was maybe 7 or 8, wearing a hospital gown that hung loose on her thin frame. Her head was bald, her skin so pale it was almost translucent, and her eyes were too large for her face, too dark, reflecting my flashlight beam back at me like mirrors. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked with something that sounded like desperation. "I've been waiting so long. Please, take me home." The footprints behind me, the ones that had led me here, and then simply stopped. They were the same size as hers. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stand there with my flashlight trained on this impossible child who was watching me with eyes that held something far older than her apparent age. The rain drummed against the windows, louder now, and in the rhythm of it, I could almost hear words. "Please, please, please." "Who are you?" I finally managed. My voice came out as a croak, barely recognizable as my own. "How did you get up here?" The girl tilted her head, that gesture I'd seen in horror movies 100 times but had never expected to encounter in real life. "I've always been here, since the day they forgot about me." She took a step forward and I took a step back instinctively, keeping the distance between us constant. "You're the first person who's come in so long. Everyone else just passes by. They don't see me, they don't hear me. But you stopped. You followed my footprints." "The floor's been closed for 3 years," I said, grasping for logic in a situation that had abandoned logic entirely. "There's no one here. There can't be anyone here." 3 years. She said it like she was tasting the words, rolling them around in her mouth. "Is that how long it's been? It feels longer. It feels like forever." She looked down at her bare feet, pale against the dusty tile. "I was supposed to go home. Mommy said I could go home soon. But then something happened, and everyone left, and I couldn't leave with them. I've been waiting ever since." The sadness in her voice cut through my fear, just slightly. Whatever this was, hallucination, ghost, stress-induced breakdown, she sounded like a child. A lost, frightened child who'd been alone in the dark for far too long. "What's your name?" I asked, softening my voice the way I used to when my niece was small and scared of thunderstorms. "Lily." She smiled, just barely, and for a moment she looked almost normal, almost alive. "Lily Chen. I was in room 614. I had leukemia. Do you know what leukemia is?" "I do." "It means your blood is sick." "My blood was very sick for a long time, but Dr. Harrison said I was getting better. He said I might get to go home for Christmas." Her smile faltered. "But then Christmas came and I was still here. And then everyone left and I was still here. And now I don't know how to leave." I thought about the whiteboard I'd passed. Emma, day 47. How many children had fought their battles in this ward? How many had won and how many had lost? And what happened to the ones who got caught somewhere in between? Lily, I said carefully, do you know why everyone left? Do you remember what happened? Her expression changed. The sadness drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. The bad thing happened. The thing that Dr. Harrison did. He said he was helping us, but he wasn't helping. He was doing something else. Something wrong. What do you mean? What did he do? She shook her head rapidly, backing away from me now, her bare feet making no sound on the dusty floor. I can't talk about it. He said we couldn't talk about it. He said if we talked about it, we'd never get to go home. But we never got to go home anyway. None of us did. None of us. The words sent ice down my spine. Lily, how many children were here when the floor closed? I don't know. Lots of us. We all stayed because of what Dr. Harrison did. We all got stuck. She was near the doors now, fading slightly, her form becoming less solid as she moved away from my flashlight beam. But you're different. You can see me. You can hear me. Maybe you can help us. Maybe you can find out what he did and tell someone. And then we can finally go home. Wait. I started toward her, but she was already gone, dissolved into the darkness like smoke and wind. The doors to the ward swung open on their own, revealing the corridor beyond, and I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Other voices, small voices, coming from the rooms I'd passed on my way here. Whispers and murmurs, the sound of children talking to each other in the dark, dozens of them, maybe more. He's here. Someone finally came. Can he help us? Will he find out what Dr. Harrison did? I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran, sprinting down the corridor past doors that were suddenly not empty anymore. I caught glimpses as I passed, small figures standing in doorways, pale faces turning to watch me, hands reaching out as if to grab my sleeve. I didn't stop, couldn't stop. The elevator was ahead, still open, still glowing with that amber light that had started all of this. I threw myself inside and slammed my hand against the lobby button. The doors started to close, slow and grinding, and in the narrowing gap, I saw them. Dozens of children standing in the corridor, watching me with eyes that reflected the elevator light like animals caught in headlights. They didn't look angry. They looked hopeful, desperate, like I was the first person in 3 years who might actually be able to help them. The doors closed. The elevator began to descend, and I slumped against the wall, gasping for breath, my flashlight clutched in a white-knuckled grip. I should have reported a malfunction, should have gone to the head of security, explained what happened, let someone else deal with it. But I knew, even as I thought it, that no one would believe me. Ghosts in the pediatric oncology ward, children who'd been dead for 3 years, still waiting to go home. I'd be fired or sent for a psych evaluation or both. Instead, I went to the security office and pulled up the employee database. It took me almost an hour of searching, but I found what I was looking for. Dr. Nathan Harrison, pediatric oncologist, employed at St. Ambrose Memorial from 2015 to 2022. Employment terminated 3 years ago, the same time the 6th floor was closed. Reason for termination: pending investigation. There was no record of what the investigation had found. No news articles, no follow-up reports, nothing to indicate what had happened or why the floor had really been sealed off. Just that single line, sitting in the database like a locked door, pending investigation. Whatever Dr. Harrison had done, someone had covered it up, and the children on the 6th floor had been paying the price ever since. I spent the next 3 days digging, called in favors with a buddy who worked at the county records office, searched through old newspaper archives at the public library, talked to long-term employees at the hospital, the ones who'd been here before the 6th floor closed. asking careful questions that wouldn't make me sound like I was losing my mind. Most of them gave me nothing, blank looks, vague answers, sudden changes of subject. But one woman, a nurse named Patricia, who'd worked in pediatrics for almost 20 years, went pale when I mentioned Dr. Harrison's name. "Where did you hear that name?" She grabbed my arm, pulling me into an empty break room and closing the door behind us. "Nobody talks about him anymore. Nobody's supposed to talk about him. I found it in the employee database. His file says he was terminated pending investigation, but there's nothing about what the investigation found." I lowered my voice, even though we were alone. "Patricia, I need to know what happened on the 6th floor. What really happened, not the water damage story." She stared at me for a long moment, something warring behind her eyes. Fear against conscience. Self-preservation against the need to finally tell someone the truth. I watched the battle play out across her face, and I waited. He was experimenting on them. The words came out in a whisper, barely audible even in the quiet room. The children, the terminal cases, the ones who weren't expected to make it. He told the parents he was trying a new treatment, something experimental that might give their kids a chance. But that wasn't what he was doing. What was he doing? I don't know exactly. Nobody does, except maybe the administrators who signed off on covering it up. But I saw the bodies after. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something in. I was on shift the night it all fell apart. There was a code blue in the pediatric ward, and then another, and then another. 7 children died that night. 7 in the span of 3 hours. All of them Dr. Harrison's patients. All of them showing signs of... She stopped, swallowed hard. They didn't look right. Their bodies didn't look right. Like something had been done to them from the inside. 7 children. I thought about Lily, about her 2 large eyes and her translucent skin, about the dozens of small figures I'd glimpsed in the corridor, watching me with desperate hope. What happened to Dr. Harrison? He disappeared, left the hospital that night and never came back. The administration sealed the floor, told everyone it was water damage, and made it very clear that anyone who talked about what really happened would be terminated immediately, without references. Patricia's voice was bitter now, anger bleeding through the fear. 7 children died and they just covered it up. Buried the investigation, paid off the families, made the whole thing disappear. And the rest of us were supposed to forget it ever happened. But you didn't forget. How could I? She met my eyes, and I saw tears there, decades old and still fresh. I was the one who found the first body, little girl, maybe 7 or 8, bald from the chemo, so thin you could count her ribs. She was just lying there in her bed, eyes wide open, and her face. Patricia's voice cracked. She looked terrified, like she'd seen something terrible in the moment before she died. They all looked like that. All 7 of them. Lily. The description matched exactly. 7 or 8, bald, thin, terrified. "Do you remember her name?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Lily Chen. She was in room 614. I went back to the 6th floor that night. The elevator stopped on its own this time, before I even pressed the button, like it knew where I wanted to go, or like something was calling me back. The doors opened onto darkness, and I stepped through without hesitation, my flashlight already in hand. Lily was waiting for me at the nurse's station. "You came back." She sounded surprised, hopeful in a way that made my chest ache. "Nobody ever comes back." "I know what happened," I said. "I know what Dr. Harrison did. He experimented on you, on all of you. He killed you." Her face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like exactly what she was, a child, a little girl who'd been through too much and understood too little. "He said he was making us better. He gave us medicine that burned, and he said it would make our blood stop being sick, but it didn't make us better. It made everything worse. And then we died, and we couldn't leave, and nobody even knew we were here. The hospital covered it up, paid off your families, sealed the floor, pretended nothing had happened. I knelt down, putting myself at her eye level, ignoring the cold that radiated from her small form. But I'm going to tell people, Lily. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what Dr. Harrison did. I'm going to make sure he pays for it. You can't. Another voice coming from the corridor behind me. I turned and saw more children emerging from the darkness, boys and girls, some younger than Lily and some older, all of them bearing the marks of illness and treatment. He's protected. The people who covered it up, they're powerful. They'll stop you the same way they stopped everyone else. They tried to stop Patricia, but she still remembers. They tried to bury the truth, but I found it anyway. I stood up, facing the gathering crowd of small ghosts. I'm not going to let this stay hidden. I'm going to find proof, real proof, the kind they can't deny, and then I'm going to blow this whole thing open. The children looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them that I couldn't interpret. Then Lily stepped forward, her small hand reaching toward mine. "There's proof," she said. "In Dr. Harrison's office. He kept files, records, everything he did to us. The hospital thought they destroyed it all, but they missed some. It's hidden in the wall behind his desk. He used to put things there when he didn't want anyone to find them." "Where's his office?" Lily pointed down the corridor, toward a door at the very end that I hadn't noticed before. A door with a nameplate that glinted faintly in my flashlight beam. "Dr. Nathan Harrison, Pediatric Oncology." "Be careful," Lily whispered. "He comes back sometimes. He can't let go either, and he doesn't want anyone to find out what he did." The door to Dr. Harrison's office was locked, but the lock was old and the frame was warped from years of neglect. One solid kick near the handle and it swung open, releasing a wave of stale air that smelled like dust and formaldehyde and something else, something chemical and wrong. I stepped inside and swept my flashlight across the room. It looked like it had been frozen in time. A desk still covered with papers, now yellowed and curling at the edges. Bookshelves lined with medical texts and journals, their spines cracked and faded. A computer monitor, ancient by modern standards, sitting dark and dead next to a keyboard thick with dust. On the walls, framed certificates and diplomas hung crooked, their glass clouded with age. Dr. Nathan Harrison, MD, PhD, Pediatric Oncology. Graduated with honors. A man who should have spent his career saving children, not using them as lab rats. The desk was pushed against the far wall, just like Lily had said. I moved toward it, stepping over scattered papers and a chair that had been knocked onto its side at some point in the past 3 years. The wall behind the desk looked solid, unremarkable, but when I ran my hands along the surface, I felt it. A seam in the drywall, barely visible, but definitely there. A panel, maybe 18 inches square, that had been cut and then carefully replaced. I didn't have tools, but I had desperation. I used my flashlight like a hammer, smashing the base of it against the seam until the drywall cracked and crumbled. Behind it was a hollow space, and inside the hollow space was a metal lockbox, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store to keep documents safe from fire. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. The lock was combination, but the box was cheap enough that a few hard strikes with my flashlight popped the hinges loose instead. The lid fell open, and I found myself staring at a stack of folders, each one labeled with a name and a date. Lily Chen, Trial 7. Marcus Williams, Trial 4. Emma Petrova, Trial 11. I opened the first folder with hands that were shaking so badly I could barely grip the pages. Inside were notes, handwritten in cramped script that was almost illegible, but I could make out enough. Dosage levels, reaction times, observations about cellular degradation and neural response, and something called consciousness transfer protocols. And photographs of children hooked up to machines I didn't recognize, their faces twisted in expressions of pain, their eyes were wrong, too large, too dark, just like Lily's, like something had been done to them that changed them on a fundamental level. I flipped through more folders, more notes, more photographs, more evidence of horrors that should never have happened within the walls of a hospital. Dr. Harrison hadn't just been experimenting on these children. He'd been trying to do something to their consciousness, their souls, trying to extract or transfer or preserve something that wasn't meant to be touched. The science was beyond my understanding, but the results were clear. He'd killed them, and trapped them here, caught between life and death, unable to move on. You shouldn't have found that. The voice came from behind me. Low, calm, almost pleasant. The kind of voice a doctor might use to deliver bad news. I spun around, and my flashlight illuminated a figure standing in the doorway. Dr. Harrison looked like he'd been dead for 3 years. His skin was gray and waxy, pulled tight over bones that seemed too prominent, and his eyes were the same as the children's. Too large, too dark, reflecting my flashlight beam with an intensity that made my stomach turn. He was wearing a lab coat, stained with something dark that I didn't want to identify, and his hands were clasped in front of him in a posture of false patience. "You're one of them," I said, backing away until I hit the desk. "You died too. You're trapped here just like they are." "Trapped?" He smiled, and it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. "I'm not trapped. I chose to stay. My work wasn't finished. The hospital may have shut me down, but death is just another obstacle to overcome." He took a step into the room, and the temperature plummeted. I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The children were necessary sacrifices. Their young consciousness, their untainted souls, they were perfect subjects for my research. And now they're part of something greater, something eternal. They're children. They were sick. They were dying. And you used them as experiments. I clutched the folders to my chest, evidence that couldn't be allowed to disappear again. You murdered them. I elevated them. His voice hardened, the pleasant facade cracking. Do you think ordinary death would have been better? Fading away in a hospital bed, forgotten within a generation? I gave them immortality. I gave them significance. They should be grateful. They want to go home. I thought about Lily, about the desperate hope in her 2 large eyes. They've been waiting for 3 years to go home, and you won't let them leave. They can't leave. Harrison was closer now, moving with that smooth, wrong glide that ghosts seem to favor. Their essence is tied to this place, to the experiments, to me. They're mine now, forever. Behind him, in the corridor, I saw movement. Small shapes gathering in the darkness, watching. The children had followed me. They were listening to every word. "And you," Harrison continued, reaching toward me with fingers that looked too long, too jointed. "You've seen too much. You can't be allowed to leave either." The cold hit me like a physical force. It drove the air from my lungs, froze the blood in my veins, made every muscle in my body seize up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as Harrison's hand came closer to my face, those wrong fingers reaching for my eyes, my mouth, my soul. Then Lily stepped between us. She was glowing, just faintly, a soft light that pushed back against the terrible cold. Behind her, the other children were moving forward, surrounding Harrison, their small forms radiating the same gentle luminescence. "No." Lily's voice was stronger than I'd ever heard it, filled with an authority that seemed impossible for such a small child. "You don't get to take anyone else. You don't get to hurt anyone else. We won't let you." Harrison's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty to something that looked almost like fear. "You can't stop me. You're nothing but failed experiments, residual energy." "We're children," Lily said. "Children you murdered. And we're done being yours." The light intensified. The children pressed closer. And Harrison began to scream. It wasn't a human scream. It was something torn from the depths of whatever Harrison had become, a sound of rage and terror and disbelief that echoed through the abandoned ward like thunder. The The children surrounded him completely now, their soft glow merging into a single radiant force that drove back the cold, that pushed against the darkness he'd wrapped around himself for 3 years. "You can't do this," he howled. "I created you. I gave you this existence. You belong to me." "We never belonged to you." It was all of them speaking now, their voices layered on top of each other, creating a harmony that was somehow beautiful despite the horror of the situation. We belonged to our families. We belonged to ourselves. You stole that from us, and now we're taking it back. The light blazed brighter. Harrison's form began to waver, to flicker, like a candle flame in a strong wind. I watched as cracks appeared in his gray skin, spreading across his face and hands, light pouring through them from somewhere inside. He screamed again, but it was weaker now, more desperate. "Please," he begged. "Please. I was trying to help. I was trying to save you. I was trying to defeat death itself." "You were trying to play God." Lily's voice cut through the others, clear and strong. "And you failed. You don't get to hurt anyone else. You don't get to stay." The light reached its peak. For one blinding moment, the entire floor was illuminated. Every abandoned room, every empty bed, every piece of equipment left behind when the ward was sealed. I saw it all in perfect clarity, and I saw Harrison at the center of it, his form dissolving, fragmenting, being torn apart by the combined will of every child he'd murdered. Then the light faded, and Dr. Nathan Harrison was gone. I stood there in the darkness, gasping for breath, the folders still clutched against my chest. The cold was gone, replaced by something warmer, gentler. The children were still there, but they looked different now, less desperate, less afraid. Lily was smiling at me, and for the first time she looked like what she was supposed to be. A 7-year-old girl, innocent and hopeful. "Is he gone?" I asked. "Really gone? He can't hurt anyone anymore." Lily looked toward the corridor, toward the windows where the rain was still falling, streaking the glass with silver. "And now we can leave too. We can finally go home." I felt tears burning in my eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. I'm sorry it took so long for someone to find you." "You came." She stepped toward me, and this time there was no cold radiating from her form. Just warmth, just peace. "That's all that matters. You came and you listened and you didn't run away. Thank you." One by one, the other children began to fade, not disappearing the way Harrison had, violently and unwillingly, but dissolving gently, peacefully, like morning mist burning off in sunlight. They smiled as they went. Some of them waved. A few whispered words I couldn't quite hear but somehow understood anyway. "Goodbye. Thank you. Tell our families we love them." Lily was the last to go. She stood there for a long moment, looking at me with those eyes that weren't quite so wrong anymore, and I saw something pass across her face. Not sadness exactly, something more like completion. "The evidence you found," she said. "Use it. Make sure everyone knows what happened here. Make sure no one else has to go through what we went through." "I will," I promised. "I swear I will." She smiled one last time. Then she faded into the light, and I was alone on the 6th floor of St. Ambrose Memorial, surrounded by silence and darkness and the knowledge of everything that had happened in this place. I took the evidence to the police the next morning, handed over the folders, the photographs, the notes that documented Harrison's experiments in horrifying detail. I told them where to find Patricia, who corroborated my story. I gave them the names of administrators who'd signed off on the cover-up, names I'd found buried in the files hidden in Harrison's office. The investigation lasted 6 months. When it was over, 3 hospital executives were in prison. 7 families had received settlements that could never truly compensate for what they'd lost, and the story had made national news. Dr. Nathan Harrison's name became synonymous with medical evil, mentioned in the same breath as the worst experimenters in history. The 6th floor of St. Ambrose Memorial was demolished. torn down to make way for a memorial garden dedicated to the children who died there. I quit the security job, couldn't walk those halls anymore, couldn't pass by the place where the 6th floor used to be without feeling the weight of everything I'd witnessed. I went back to school instead, got a degree in social work, started a career helping children in the foster system find safe and loving homes. It felt right. It felt like the kind of thing Lily would have wanted. I still think about them sometimes. Late at night, when the rain is falling and the world is quiet, I'll remember those small figures in the darkness, their 2 large eyes and their desperate hope. I'll remember Lily stepping between me and Harrison, her small form glowing with a light that had been stolen from her but never quite extinguished. I'll remember the sound of all those voices speaking together, children who'd been victims becoming something more, something powerful enough to finally defeat the monster who'd created them. The hospital never admitted what really happened on that floor. Officially, the story is still about water damage and budget constraints and a renovation that never quite got funded. But the families know, the investigators know, and I know. 7 children died in that ward. 7 children were trapped for 3 years, waiting for someone to hear them, to find them, to set them free. They deserved better than what they got. They deserved long lives and happy futures and the chance to grow up and become whoever they were meant to be. They didn't get that, but they got something else in the end. They got justice, they got peace, they got to go home. And sometimes, on the anniversary of that night, I visit the memorial garden where the 6th floor used to stand. I bring 7 roses, 1 for each child, and I leave them at the base of the stone marker that bears their names. I stay for a while, remembering, honoring, making sure they're never forgotten again. The elevator at St. Ambrose doesn't stop on the 6th floor anymore. There is no 6th floor. But sometimes, when I'm there for my annual visit, I'll swear I feel something in the air around me. Something warm, something grateful, something that feels like a child saying thank you. And that's enough. That has to be enough. Story 5. The handprint on my bathroom mirror. The first time I saw the handprint, I assumed it was mine. I'd just gotten out of the shower, the bathroom thick with steam, and there it was on the mirror, a perfect impression of a palm and 5 fingers, pressed flat against the glass like someone had leaned in close to study their reflection. I didn't think much of it. I must have touched the mirror at some point, maybe while reaching for my toothbrush or wiping condensation away. I grabbed a towel, cleaned it off, and went about my morning. The second time, I paid more attention. It was 3 days later, same routine, shower, steam, handprint. But this time I was looking at it properly, really seeing it, and something about it made me pause. The hand was smaller than mine. I placed my own palm against the glass, lining up the edges, and the difference was obvious. This print belonged to someone with delicate fingers, a narrow palm, a hand that was at least 2 sizes smaller than my own. I live alone. I've lived alone in this apartment for almost 4 months, ever since my divorce finalized, and I needed somewhere to rebuild my life that didn't smell like failed marriage and broken promises. It's a small place, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, but it's mine. No one else has keys, no one else comes and goes, and I definitely don't have any visitors with hands that small. I cleaned the mirror again, more thoroughly this time. Watched the print smear and disappear under my towel. Told myself it was nothing, probably just an old mark that the steam had revealed. Something left behind by a previous tenant that I'd never noticed before. But the next morning, it was back, same spot, same size, same perfect impression of a hand that wasn't mine, pressed against the glass like someone was reaching through from the other side. I stood there in my towel, water dripping onto the tile floor, and stared at it until the steam began to fade, and the print slowly vanished as the mirror cleared. Not wiped away, vanished, like it had never been there at all, like it only existed in the fog, in that liminal space between shower and morning, when the world was soft and blurred and anything seemed possible. I started paying attention to the timing after that. The handprint appeared every single morning, always in the same spot, always the same size. It was never there when the mirror was clear. Only when steam covered the glass would it emerge, that small palm and those delicate fingers, pressed flat like someone was trying to push through into my world. I tried everything I could think of. Cleaned the mirror with glass cleaner, with vinegar, with rubbing alcohol. Replaced the mirror entirely, mounting a new one from the hardware store with my own 2 hands. The next morning, the handprint was on the new mirror, exactly where it had been on the old one. Same spot, same size, same impossible presence that shouldn't have existed. That's when I started to get scared. The apartment building was old, built in the 1950s, renovated twice since then, but still carrying that particular weight that old buildings have. History layered upon history, lives stacked on top of lives. I'd chosen it because the rent was cheap and the location was convenient, and I needed somewhere fast after the divorce left me scrambling. I hadn't asked too many questions about the place, hadn't wanted to know. Now I wanted to know. I started with my landlord, a distracted man named Becker who managed a dozen properties and couldn't remember which unit was which half the time. When I asked about the previous tenants of my apartment, he had to look it up in his records, scrolling through a spreadsheet on his ancient laptop while I waited. Unit 3B, he muttered. Let's see. Before you, there was a guy named Morrison, software developer, I think. He was there about 8 months. Before him, he paused, frowning at the screen. Huh, that's weird. What? The unit was empty for almost 2 years before Morrison moved in. That's a long time for a place this size to sit vacant. He scrolled some more. And before that, the tenant was... Another pause. His frown deepened. Actually, you know what? I don't have complete records going back that far. The previous management company wasn't great about keeping files. Is there any way to find out who lived here before the 2-year gap? Becker looked at me like I'd asked him to solve a complex math problem. Why do you want to know? I couldn't exactly tell him the truth. Couldn't say that something was leaving handprints on my mirror, something with small hands and a persistent presence that I couldn't explain away no matter how hard I tried. So I just shrugged and said I was curious about the building's history, and he gave me a look that suggested he thought I was wasting his time, but wasn't going to argue about it. I did my own research after that. The building's address pulled up a few results, reviews on apartment websites, a mention in a local blog about historic architecture, and one small article from the county newspaper dated almost 7 years ago. Woman found deceased in Eastwood Apartments. The headline made my stomach drop. The article was brief, the way local news always is when the details are uncomfortable. A woman named Catherine Shaw, 31 years old, had been found dead in her apartment after neighbors noticed a smell. Cause of death was listed as accidental overdose. She'd lived alone. She'd been dead for almost 2 weeks before anyone realized she was gone. The article didn't specify which unit. But I knew. I knew with a certainty that went beyond logic, beyond evidence, beyond anything I could prove. Catherine Shaw had died in my apartment. She died in my bathroom, maybe, or my bedroom, and she'd been lying there for 2 weeks while the world went on without her. And now something was leaving handprints on my mirror. Small handprints, a woman's handprints. I looked at the photograph that accompanied the article. Catherine Shaw had dark hair and sad eyes and hands that, even in the grainy newspaper image, looked delicate and small. The same size as the print on my mirror. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Catherine Shaw, 31 years old, dead for 2 weeks in the apartment where I now brushed my teeth and made my coffee and tried to pretend I wasn't falling apart. I imagined her lying there in the summer heat, alone and forgotten, while the world outside her door carried on without noticing. It was the loneliest image I'd ever conjured, and it haunted me almost as much as the handprint itself. I dug deeper, found her obituary in an archived edition of the local paper, a sparse paragraph that mentioned she was survived by a sister in Portland and had worked as a receptionist at a dental practice downtown. No mention of friends who'd miss her. No mention of a partner or children or anyone who might have noticed sooner that she was gone. Just a sister across the country and a job that had probably filled her position within a week. She'd been alone. Really, truly alone. The way I was alone now, rattling around in this small apartment with no one to notice if I stopped showing up. The thought made something cold settle in my chest. The handprint changed the morning after I found the obituary. It was still there, still that same small palm pressed against the steamy glass, but this time it wasn't alone. Below it, written in the condensation like someone had traced the letters with a fingertip, was a single word: H-E-L-P. I stood there for so long that the steam faded and the word disappeared, leaving nothing but clear glass that reflected my own pale, frightened face. Help. She was asking for help. Catherine Shaw, dead for 7 years, was reaching through whatever barrier separated her world from mine and asking me to help her. The question was, help with what? I started leaving notes. It felt ridiculous, like something a child would do to communicate with imaginary friends, but I didn't know what else to try. I'd write questions on post-it notes and stick them to the mirror before I went to bed, hoping that Catherine, if it was Catherine, could see them and respond. The first night I wrote, "What do you need?" The next morning, in the steam, "Not accident." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not accident. The official cause of death was accidental overdose, but Catherine was telling me something different. She was telling me that whatever happened to her, it wasn't what the police had concluded. It wasn't what anyone had believed. I wrote another note. "What happened to you?" The response came the following morning, more words traced in the fog. "He killed me." My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the towel. He killed me. Someone had murdered Catherine Shaw, had made it look like an overdose, and had gotten away with it for 7 years while her ghost remained trapped in this apartment, unable to move on, unable to tell anyone the truth. Who? I wrote that night, the post-it trembling as I pressed it to the glass. The next morning there were no words, just the handprint pressed flat against the mirror, and beside it, another handprint, larger this time. A man's hand, the fingers thick and blunt, the palm wide enough to dwarf Catherine's delicate impression. 2 hands on my mirror now, hers and his, and I understood what she was showing me. The hand of the person who'd killed her. The hand that had pressed against the glass at some point, leaving behind an impression that had been waiting all this time to be revealed. I photographed everything. The handprints, the messages, every scrap of evidence I could capture before the steam faded and took it all away. The images were blurry, barely visible, the kind of thing that could easily be dismissed as pareidolia or digital artifacts. But I knew what I was seeing. I knew what Catherine was trying to tell me. The rain started that afternoon, a steady downpour that turned the streets to rivers and kept me trapped inside with my thoughts and my photographs and the growing certainty that I'd stumbled into something I couldn't walk away from. I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through everything I could find about Catherine Shaw's death, looking for some mention of a man in her life who might have had reason to want her dead. The dental practice where she'd worked was still in business. I called them, pretending to be an old friend trying to track down information for a memorial project. The receptionist who answered was young, probably hadn't been there when Catherine was alive, but she transferred me to the office manager, a woman named Diane who'd worked there for 15 years. "Catherine?" Diane's voice softened when I mentioned the name. "Oh, that was such a tragedy. She was a sweet girl, quiet, kept to herself mostly, but sweet. We were all shocked when we heard what happened. Did she have anyone in her life? A boyfriend, maybe?" A pause. When Diane spoke again, her tone had shifted, become more guarded. "There was someone. I don't remember his name. She never brought him around. But I remember she seemed scared of him toward the end. Came in with bruises a few times, said she'd fallen or bumped into things. We all knew what that meant, but she wouldn't talk about it." "Did you tell the police when she died?" I tried. They didn't seem interested. They'd already decided it was an overdose, and they weren't looking for other explanations. Diane sighed. I've always wondered, though, if maybe there was more to the story, if maybe someone should have looked harder. Someone should have. And now, 7 years too late, someone finally was. I hung up and sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. Catherine had been in an abusive relationship. Her co-workers had noticed bruises, and when she died, everyone had accepted the easy explanation. Troubled woman, accidental overdose, case closed. But Catherine knew the truth. She'd been waiting 7 years to tell someone, and now she'd finally found someone willing to listen. I went to the bathroom that night with a new question written on a post-it note. The most important question. The one that could change everything if I could just get an answer. What was his name? I stuck the note to the mirror and went to bed, knowing I wouldn't sleep, knowing that everything depended on what I found written in the steam tomorrow morning. The name was waiting for me when I woke up. Derek Vance. I stood in my bathroom, steam swirling around me, and stared at those 2 words until they began to fade. Derek Vance. The man who had killed Catherine Shaw. The man who had gotten away with murder for 7 years while his victim's ghost remained trapped in the apartment where she'd died, waiting for someone to finally hear her truth. I searched for him immediately, still in my bathrobe, water dripping from my hair onto the keyboard. Derek Vance wasn't a common name, and it only took a few minutes to find him. He lived across town now, in a nicer neighborhood, in a house that probably cost more than I'd make in a decade. He worked in real estate. Commercial properties, high-end developments, the kind of work that required a clean reputation and a trustworthy smile. His LinkedIn profile showed a man in his late 30s, handsome in that aggressive way some men have, with a jawline that looked carved from stone and eyes that revealed absolutely nothing. There were photos of him at charity events, photos of him shaking hands with local politicians, photos of him receiving awards from the Chamber of Commerce for his contributions to the community. Derek Vance had built himself a respectable life in the 7 years since Catherine died. He'd moved on. He'd prospered. He'd left her behind to rot in a forgotten apartment while he climbed the ladder to success. The anger that surged through me was almost overwhelming. I wanted to go to the police immediately, to show them Catherine's messages, to demand they reopen the case and investigate the man whose handprint had been pressed against my mirror alongside his victims. But I knew how that would go. I'd seen enough crime shows, read enough news articles to understand that steam-written accusations from a ghost wouldn't exactly hold up in court. The police would think I was crazy, or grieving, or looking for attention. They wouldn't believe me any more than they'd believed Diane 7 years ago. I needed proof, real proof, the kind that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. And for that, I needed to understand exactly what had happened in my apartment on the night Catherine Shaw died. I wrote another note that evening. How did he do it? The answer came the next morning, letter by painstaking letter traced in the fog. Pills in my drink made it look like I did it. The simplicity of it made me sick. He drugged her, probably with the same pills that showed up in her system during the autopsy. Made it look like she'd taken them herself, like she'd decided to end her own life rather than face whatever pain she'd been carrying. It was elegant, in a horrible way. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds. Just a woman alone in her apartment, dead from an apparent overdose, with no one close enough to question the official story. I photographed the message before it faded, added it to my growing collection of evidence. But I knew photographs wouldn't be enough. I needed something that connected Derek Vance to Catherine Shaw's death in a way that couldn't be attributed to condensation patterns or wishful thinking or a disturbed woman's imagination. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the world gray and dripping. I spent the day digging through public records, looking for any connection between Derek Vance and Catherine Shaw that might have been documented somewhere. Court records, property filings, anything that might show they'd known each other. I found it in a civil complaint from 8 years ago. Catherine Shaw had filed for a restraining order against Derek Vance, citing harassment and threats of violence. The complaint included specific allegations that he'd shown up at her workplace, that he'd followed her home, that he'd told her he'd kill her if she ever tried to leave him. But the case had been dismissed when Catherine failed to appear for the hearing, and I could only imagine why she hadn't shown up. Fear, probably. Or Derek had convinced her to drop it. Either way, the restraining order had never been granted, and 6 months later, Catherine was dead. It was a connection, a documented, official connection between Derek Vance and Catherine Shaw. But it still wasn't enough to prove murder, not after 7 years, not without physical evidence or witnesses or something more than a dismissed civil complaint and messages written in bathroom steam. That night, something changed. I was sitting in my living room, going through my notes for the 100th time, when I heard a sound from the bathroom. Not the usual settling of pipes or the drip of a faucet. Something else. Something that sounded almost like breathing. I got up slowly, my heart already beginning to pound. The bathroom door was closed. I always kept it closed now, ever since the messages started, like I could contain whatever was happening if I just kept it behind a barrier. But as I approached, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Light was seeping through the crack beneath the door. Not the light from my bathroom bulb, which I hadn't turned on. Something dimmer, flickering, like candlelight. I pushed the door open. Catherine was standing at the mirror. Not a handprint, not words in the steam. Her. A woman with dark hair and sad eyes and skin so pale it was almost translucent. She was wearing the same clothes from the photograph in the newspaper, a simple sweater and jeans, and she was looking at me with an expression of desperate urgency. "He knows," she said. Her voice was a whisper, barely there, like words heard from very far away. "He knows you're looking. You have to be careful. He's coming." "What do you mean? How could he know?" She flickered, her form wavering like a candle flame in a draft. "I don't know. I just feel it. He's angry. The same way he was angry before, the night he..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Please, you have to stop him before he hurts someone else." "Someone else?" Catherine looked at me with those sad, dead eyes, and I saw something in them that wasn't just fear for me. Something older, deeper. "I wasn't the first," she whispered. "I was just the first one who tried to leave." Then she was gone, and I was standing alone in my dark bathroom, my reflection staring back at me from the mirror. And somewhere outside, I heard a car engine idling, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights off, watching through a crack in the blinds as a dark SUV sat parked across the street. I couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows, but I didn't need to. I knew who it was. I knew why he was there. The SUV left around 3 in the morning, pulling away slowly, its headlights sweeping across my windows as it turned the corner. I waited another hour before I let myself breathe normally, before I let myself believe that he was really gone. But I knew this was just the beginning. Derek Vance had survived 7 years without anyone looking too closely at Catherine's death. He wasn't going to let some random woman in his victim's old apartment ruin everything he'd built. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started making copies of everything. The photographs, the research, the civil complaint I'd printed out. I made 3 sets and hid them in different locations, one in a safe deposit box at my bank, one in a sealed envelope I mailed to my sister in Chicago, one tucked behind a loose panel in my bedroom closet. If something happened to me, someone would find them. Someone would know. Catherine's words kept echoing in my head. I wasn't the first. I was just the first one who tried to leave. If Derek had killed before Catherine, that meant there might be other victims, other women who'd died under suspicious circumstances, other cases that had been closed too quickly, other ghosts who'd never gotten their justice. I spent the day searching. It was painstaking work, scrolling through obituaries and news archives, looking for women who died in ways that might connect to Derek Vance. I found 2 that made my stomach turn. The first was a woman named Rachel Torres, who died in a car accident 9 years ago. Single vehicle, late at night, alcohol in her system. The article mentioned that she'd recently ended a relationship but didn't name her ex-boyfriend. She was 28. The second was a woman named Michelle Park, who drowned in her bathtub 11 years ago, ruled accidental. She'd been taking medication for anxiety, and the coroner concluded she'd fallen asleep in the water. She was 32, lived alone, and according to her obituary, had struggled with depression after a difficult breakup. 3 women, 3 deaths ruled accidental, all of them single, all of them alone, all of them dying in ways that couldn't be easily questioned. It was a pattern, a horrible, meticulous pattern that Derek Vance had perfected over more than a decade. I was still researching when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should stop asking questions about things that don't concern you." My hands went cold. I stared at the message, reading it over and over, the threat implicit in every word. He had my phone number now. He knew exactly who I was and where I lived and what I was doing, and he wanted me to know that he knew. Another text came through a minute later. "Accidents happen all the time, especially to people who live alone." I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to pack a bag and drive somewhere far away, to put as much distance between myself and Derek Vance as possible. But I thought about Catherine, trapped in this apartment for 7 years. I thought about Rachel and Michelle. Their deaths never investigated, their killer never caught. If I ran now, he'd just keep going, keep killing, keep getting away with it until someone finally stopped him. I had to be the one who stopped him. That night, the bathroom mirror showed something different. Not words, not handprints, a drawing. Catherine had traced something in the steam, a crude sketch that took me a moment to recognize. A rectangle with smaller rectangles inside it, a grid pattern, numbers beneath each section. A storage unit. She was showing me a storage unit. I photographed it quickly, capturing the image before it faded. The numbers were blurry but legible, a facility code and a unit number. Catherine was telling me where to find something that Derek Vance had hidden away, something that might be the proof I needed. The storage facility was on the edge of town, a sprawling complex of orange buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. I drove there the next morning, my heart pounding the entire way, constantly checking my rearview mirror for any sign of the dark SUV. The unit Catherine had shown me was in the back row, a medium-sized space with a padlock on the door that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I'd brought bolt cutters. I wasn't proud of it, wasn't sure it was even legal, but I'd stopped caring about legal somewhere around the time a murder victim started leaving me messages on my bathroom mirror. The lock gave way with a screech of protesting metal, and I rolled up the door to reveal what was inside. Boxes, dozens of them, stacked floor to ceiling, covered in dust and cobwebs. I pulled the first one open and found what looked like junk, old clothes, random papers, things that might have belonged to anyone. But the second box was different. The second box was full of women's belongings, jewelry, photographs, driver's licenses, a collection of items that could only be trophies, souvenirs taken from victims to remember them by. I found Catherine's driver's license near the top, her face smiling up at me from the laminated card. Below it was Rachel Torres. Below that, Michelle Park. And below them, more. So many more, stretching back years, maybe decades. Derek Vance hadn't killed 3 women. He'd killed dozens. And he'd kept proof of every single one. I was photographing everything, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. I warned you. I spun around. Derek Vance was standing at the entrance to the storage unit, silhouetted against the gray morning light. He was bigger than he'd looked in his photos, broader, his face twisted into an expression of cold fury that made everything inside me go still. "You should have listened," he said, stepping inside. "You should have stopped asking questions." He closed the rolling door behind him, and the unit went dark. For a moment, I couldn't see anything. Just blackness, absolute and suffocating, and the sound of Derek's footsteps moving closer. I backed away instinctively, my hip hitting one of the stacked boxes, and I heard him laugh. A low, satisfied sound, the laugh of a man who'd done this before, and knew exactly how it would end. "You know, I almost admired you," he said. His voice was coming from my left now, circling. "Most people give up after the first warning, but you just kept digging, kept asking questions, couldn't leave well enough alone. Another step, closer. Catherine was like that too. Just couldn't accept that some things are better left buried." My hand found my phone in my pocket. I'd been photographing the evidence when he arrived, which meant the camera was still open, which meant I hit the flashlight button. Light blazed through the storage unit, catching Derek mid-stride, his face frozen in surprise. In that split second of hesitation, I saw something else, something behind him, between him and the closed door. A woman, pale and translucent, with dark hair and sad eyes. Catherine, but she wasn't alone. There were others materializing out of the darkness, one by one, filling the storage unit with their ghostly presence. Rachel Torres, her face still bearing the wounds from her car accident. Michelle Park, water dripping from her hair and clothes, and more, so many more, women I didn't recognize but whose driver's licenses I'd seen in those boxes. Decades of victims, finally gathered together, finally facing the man who'd taken everything from them. Derek saw them too. I could tell from the way his face went white, the way he stumbled backward, the way his confident smile collapsed into something that looked almost like terror. "No," he whispered. "No, you're not real. You're dead. I made sure you were all dead." "You did." Catherine's voice was stronger now, more present than it had ever been in my bathroom. "You killed us. And then you kept us, trapped us, turned us into trophies you could visit whenever you wanted to remember what you'd done." She stepped closer, and Derek retreated until his back hit the rolling door. "But you made a mistake, Derek. You kept too much. You held on to too much of us. And now we're holding on to you." The other women moved forward, surrounding him, their forms growing more solid as they approached. I saw hands reaching for Derek, dozens of pale hands that had once belonged to living women, closing around his arms and shoulders and throat. "Please," he begged. His voice had gone high and thin, nothing like the confident predator who'd closed me in this unit moments ago. "Please, I'll confess. I'll tell them everything. Just let me go." "You had 7 years to confess." Catherine's face was inches from his now, her eyes boring into his with an intensity that made even me look away. "You had decades to feel remorse, to turn yourself in, to give our families the truth. Instead, you built yourself a nice life and forgot we ever existed." Her hand pressed against his chest, and I saw frost spreading from her fingertips. "Now you don't get to forget anymore." The cold hit him like a wave. I watched Derek Vance collapse to the floor of the storage unit, his body convulsing, his screams muffled by the hands covering his mouth. The women surrounded him completely now, blocking him from view, and the temperature in the unit dropped so low I could see my breath crystallizing in front of my face. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The ghosts faded. The cold retreated. Derek lay motionless on the concrete floor, his eyes open and staring at nothing, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. For one horrible moment, I thought they'd killed him, that I'd just witnessed a murder. A justified one maybe, but still a murder, and I'd have to explain how a man had died of supernatural causes in a storage unit full of evidence. But then his chest moved, a shallow breath, then another. He was alive, unconscious, but alive. I called 911, gave them the address, told them I'd found evidence of multiple homicides, told them the perpetrator was on scene and incapacitated. Then I sat down on one of the boxes and waited, surrounded by the trophies of a serial killer, listening to the distant wail of approaching sirens. The investigation took almost a year. Derek Vance never spoke again. The doctors said he'd suffered some kind of neurological event, a stroke maybe, or a seizure, something that had left him catatonic and unresponsive. He spent the rest of his life in a long-term care facility, trapped inside his own body, unable to communicate or move or do anything except lie there and remember. I like to think he's still remembering, still seeing their faces, still feeling their hands, still drowning in the terror of being held accountable for everything he did. The evidence in the storage unit led to the identification of 34 victims spanning more than 20 years. 34 women who'd been dismissed as accidents, suicides, overdoses. 34 lives ended by a man who'd learned exactly how to kill without getting caught. The families were notified. The cases were reopened and closed again, this time with the truth attached. Cold case investigators called it the biggest break they'd ever had, a miracle of evidence preservation that they couldn't quite explain. I never told them about Catherine, never mentioned the handprint on my mirror, or the messages in the steam, or the army of ghosts who'd finally gotten their revenge. Some things aren't meant to be explained. Some things just need to be accepted. I still live in the apartment. I thought about moving after everything that happened, but somehow it didn't feel right. This place had been Catherine's prison for 7 years, and now it was just an apartment again. The handprint doesn't appear anymore. The steam fades without messages, without drawings, without any sign that someone else is reaching through from the other side. But sometimes, late at night, when the rain is falling and the world outside my window is soft and blurred, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the mirror. Not a handprint, not a face, just a sense of presence, warm and grateful, like someone stopping by to say thank you before moving on. I cleaned up my divorce papers last month. Started seeing a therapist, someone I could talk to about the loneliness and the fear and the feeling of being invisible in a world that doesn't always notice when people disappear. I'm building a life here, slowly, carefully, in the apartment where a woman died alone and forgotten. But I won't be forgotten. I won't let anyone else be forgotten either. Every year, on the anniversary of Catherine Shaw's death, I light a candle and place it by my bathroom mirror. I say her name out loud, and Rachel's name, and Michelle's name, and all the other names I learned from those boxes in the storage unit. 34 candles now. 34 names. 34 women who deserved to be remembered. The mirror stays clear. The steam fades without messages. But I know Catherine can hear me. And I know finally that she's at peace.